Chapter 1002. In the underground spirit cave of the East Sea City, the heaven-refining cauldron floated above Wuxia's head. Wisps of flames were constantly melting various rare materials, turning them into colorful solutions. Under the control of Wuxia's powerful divine sense, these melted rare materials were twisted into various complex runes and constantly imprinted into thousands of weapons of merit. In the middle, a Xianyuan sword floated. Its original majestic aura was still there, and a despair-inducing sharpness was bursting out from the blade, stimulating the heaven-refining cauldron to make muffled buzzing sounds. Thousands of senior civil officials of the East Sea, including Lu Qingfeng, and countless immortals of the East Sea, sat around Wuxia and spewed out their natal true fires. After being refined and purified by the heaven-refining cauldron, Wuxia added his own understanding of the heavenly Tao to them. Around these immortals were dragons in human form and other divine beasts and immortal birds. Audiobook unified the Zhoutian dragons and abducted countless beasts that were forced to become mounts. Regarding Audiobook's behavior, Wuxia did not express any opinion on the surface, but he was very happy in his heart. He specially cultivated the dragons and these beasts, striving to produce a large number of high-level dragons, divine beasts, and immortal birds in a short period of time. Whether it was dragons or other beasts, they all had their own innate abilities, and their cultivation speed was much faster than that of humans. Under Wuxia's deliberate promotion, in just a short period of tens of thousands of years, more than a dozen elders of the dragons broke through to the Tao-breaking realm, and nearly 1,000 other elders broke through to the Tao-reasoning realm. The overall strength of the dragons had almost doubled. Other beasts also broke through one after another. Under the leadership of Audiobook, the best of these divine beasts and immortal birds were paired with the dragons, further complicating the bloodline of the dragons and greatly enhancing the combat power of the dragons. Regardless of whether they were married to a handsome dragon or a beautiful dragon girl, they were all on the same boat of the dragon race. They were tightly tied to the war chariot that was the Yanhuang country. The transformation of an artifact of virtue was extremely complicated. Increasing their power without damaging the aura of virtue was a job that required great care and attention. Even with Wuxia's artifact refinement technique, it had taken him nearly 1,000,000 years to transform the thousands of artifacts of virtue into their final forms, and he was only one step away from the final stage of nourishing them. Suddenly Wuxia, who had been covering the entire Pangu continent with a wisp of divine sense, was stunned. He performed a few incantation gestures, and threw them into the heaven-refining cauldron. The Yuanling true flame burst out and enveloped the items of merit. He chuckled and said, "There's going to be a show, Huangliang of Qi, Huang, and the items of the Huang sect emperor realm." Then he pulled out the Book of Life and Death and drew a line in the air. A screen of light shot down, revealing two armies marching through the mountains. Like two large pincers of a crab, the two armies, one on the left and the other on the right, were clawing at the camp of the Ling dynasty, which was located on a flat land surrounded by mountains. Each army had hundreds of thousands of men and horses, and each of them had a strong cultivation base. They could cross mountains and rivers as if they were walking on flat land, moving extremely fast in the mountains. The armors worn by the two armies were very different from the standard armors of Du. The half-body armors only covered the vital parts of the upper body, giving off a fierce air. Many soldiers did not even bother to put on the armors, but just clenched their jaws and marched forward with their weapons in hand. Look carefully, they are wearing only half-body armors or no armors at all. These are the characteristics of the Daqin warriors. It looks like the 6 states have returned to you, but they still haven't given up on the things buried deep in their bones. Wuxia said coolly, "Huangliang, learn from them how they arrange their armies and formations. The tactics of Du are outdated in front of them for God knows how many years. If you lead an army to fight against them, you won't even know how you died." The generals of Du army were all simple-minded. They were best at relying on their overwhelming strength and superior numbers to fight and charge. The formations they were best at were the most traditional square and circular formations. In the face of famed generals like Bai Qi and Han Xian, such a rigid and inflexible strategy was simply suicidal. Therefore, Wuxia took some time out of his busy schedule to show the head-on clash between Bai Qi and Han Xian. so that Huang Liang and the other generals of the East Sea could learn what a real war was. If it was Huang Liang who was in charge of the Great Yu army, he would definitely choose to charge out from the city and clash with the enemy head-on. That way, he would be bombarded by tens of thousands of demonic shooting sun carps, and it was unknown how many soldiers he would lose before he could reach the Ling dynasty's camp. As for Baiqi, he simply ordered his soldiers to make a detour from the mountains on both sides and launch an attack. Relying on the powerful cultivation base of his soldiers, he would definitely be able to disperse the Ling dynasty's camp. While the two armies were taking a detour, the collapsed city wall of the city that Gongsun Meng was stationed in was suddenly blasted open by a huge force. Baiqi, who was bare-chested and holding a long sword in his hand, rode out on a black horse, followed by a few thousand cavalrymen. Baiqi raised his long sword and swung it forward, unleashing several dozens of blood-red beams, shattering all the white beams shooting toward him. The sword beams streaked across the lake, and those demonic shooting sun carps quickly hid in the water. When the sword beams streaked across the lake, blood could be vaguely seen spraying out from the water. Obviously, some of the demonic shooting sun carps were injured. Throwing his head back and laughing wildly, Baiqi raised his long sword up high and cried out, "Han Xian, little brat, do you dare to fight with me, Baiqi? Ha ha ha, if you don't, then crawl under Grandpa Baiqi's crotch. Hehe, can you really endure the humiliation of being crawled under my crotch?" Standing on a small hill in the middle of the military camp of the Ling dynasty, Han Xian remained perfectly calm and said with a resonant voice, "Wang Baiqi, the murderer? I've long heard that you're a rare famous general, but how could you say such a stupid thing? Han Xian is good at commanding troops, but I'm not interested in fighting you with my bare hands." Clicking his tongue, he said, "You were still in Liangzhu City a few days ago. Why are you here with your army today? Are these the reinforcements you brought? What can 1,000 people do?" Baiqi laughed out loud and said, "Cut the crap. I don't care what you're good at. As long as you don't dare to fight me alone, you're a useless coward." Han Xian knitted his eyebrows. Ignoring Baiqi's provocative words, he sneered and said, "Baiqi, you can't possibly bring only 1,000 people here as reinforcements. Where's your army? You're not going to launch an attack from the back of Han Xian's camp, are you? TSK, or are you going to launch a surprise attack from my flanks? I don't think your soldiers are digging tunnels under the ground, and you're going to launch a surprise attack from the inside of my camp, are you?" Baiqi grinned and squeezed his legs. Crack! A dark horse, which he had just replaced, was torn into two by Baiqi. Baiqi cursed angrily, cursing all 18 generations of Ao Buzan's ancestors. Han Xian's expression flickered as well. He turned to the general next to him and said, "So even the high-grade Mount of Du has been abducted by that Ao Buzan? The mighty king of killers can only ride an ordinary horse into battle? Hee, what a joke." Before the laughter stopped, countless Du's soldiers suddenly rushed out from a mountain pass to the east of the Ling dynasty's camp. Crazily, these soldiers stripped off their upper bodies, roared, and charged at the Ling dynasty's camp. These soldiers, who had cultivated the cultivation techniques of the human race to at least the realm of first Panga heaven, ran as fast as the wind, and with just a few leaps and bounds, they arrived before the camp of Ling dynasty. With a straight face, Han Xian waved his hand to the east. Immediately, 2 squads of soldiers who were ready for battle rushed to the east side of the camp and lined up in a long, snake-like formation. Tens of thousands of soldiers raised the specially made crossbows in their hands at the same time. With a loud clapper, the bolts fell like a rainstorm. The bolts, engraved with all kinds of armor-piercing, corrosive, poisonous, explosive runes, and other runes, collided head-on with the charging soldiers of Du. Thousands of explosive bolts exploded with a power equal to the full-force strike of an upper-tier heaven immortal, blowing away tens of thousands of Du's soldiers who were charging at the front. The bodies of every Du's soldier who was charging at the front were densely covered with bolts. They were blown far away and fell to the ground in a sorry state. Then they pulled out the bolts that kept corroding their bodies, lay on the ground and panted for a while. Their wounds healed quickly, and then they continued to charge forward. Only some unlucky soldiers were hit in the head by the explosive bolts, and their heads were blown to pieces, killing them instantly. A deep, muffled drumming rang out, and suddenly, Tens of thousands of holes were dug out from the ground to the east of the Ling dynasty's camp. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers poked their upper bodies out of the holes, holding the same crossbows in their hands. The cultivation base of these Ling dynasty soldiers hiding underground was very weak, and some of them probably did not even have the cultivation base of the Jindan realm. But they could pull the crossbows and fire the bolts, and that was enough. The huge array of crossbows whistled through the air, forcibly stopping the charge of Diyu's soldiers. The more the merrier, Han Xian. Han Xian said coldly. Haven't you heard of this saying, the king of killers? A strange gleam flashed across Baiqi's eyes as he looked coldly at his subordinates, whose attack was forcibly stopped. On the battlefield of Panggu continent, Han Xian was the first person to send a large number of soldiers with low cultivation bases to the battlefield. Any human soldier whose cultivation base had reached the realm of first Panggu heaven could easily slaughter tens of thousands of these weak soldiers. But these Ling dynasty soldiers armed with crossbows were able to stop the hundreds of thousands of Diyu's soldiers from advancing. The eastern mountains of the Ling dynasty's camp were blanketed by the explosion of arrows. After trying out the effects of various arrows, the Ling dynasty soldiers brazenly switched to explosive arrows. These arrows could blow the charging Diyu's soldiers back, and if they were lucky, their heads were blown off, effectively killing an enemy. The life force of human soldiers was indeed strong. As long as they stepped on Panggu continent, they could constantly absorb Panggu's sacred energy to heal their injuries. It was as if the mountains had been ravaged by hundreds of thousands of heavy cannons. Hundreds of thousands of Diyu's soldiers were constantly blown away, and then they jumped up from the ground again and again, charging forward with no regard for their own safety. As long as they could break into the Ling dynasty's camp, with their absolute advantage in cultivation bases, they would be able to slaughter to their heart's content. A shrill dragon horn sounded, and at the same time, a large number of Diyu's soldiers poured out of the two mountain passes to the west of the Ling dynasty's camp. Han Xian waved his hand, and the same thing happened. Two groups of soldiers who had long been ready strode to the west of the Ling dynasty's camp. Tens of thousands of hiding places were opened, and the mountains in the west were completely blanketed with arrows. Wuxia glanced at Huang Liang, whose face was pale, and said coolly, "Look, if it were you, you would have gone straight to the enemy's camp with an army of 1,000,000 soldiers." Han Xian, on the other hand, was already prepared. How are you going to break into his camp? Are you going to fill the trap with more soldiers? Huang Liang bowed his head and said nothing, lost in deep thought. Chapter 1003. In the underground spirit cave, Wuxia was explaining to Huang Liang the tactics of Baiqi and Han Xian. Baiqi's tactics conformed to the norm, and there was nothing outstanding about them for the time being. However, Han Xian's tactics were extremely effective. He had fully utilized the advantages of manpower and weapons. There was no need to waste the elite forces to do something that ordinary soldiers could do. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, who were only slightly stronger than mortals, had forcibly withstood the charge of 1,000,000 Diyu soldiers with bows and crossbows. Diyu's soldiers were constantly injured and exhausted by the arrows, while the Ling dynasty's elite army was resting in the camp. When the morale of Diyu's army dropped, the Ling dynasty's army would charge out, and Baiqi would probably suffer a crushing defeat. A battle of 1,000,000 soldiers was a drop in the bucket for both Diyu and the Ling dynasty. Even if all the soldiers were lost, it would not affect the overall situation. However, it represented the face of Baiqi and Han Xian. No matter who lost, it would be a great blow to themselves. Especially since this was the first all-out battle between Diyu and the Ling dynasty. Whoever won or lost, it would have a great impact on the morale of both countries. Arrows rained down from the sky, and the charging Diyu soldiers on the left and right flanks showed signs of fatigue. Their bodies were still full of energy, but their souls were tired. They had been fighting from noon until dusk, constantly being blasted away by arrows, and then rejoining the battlefield after recovering their strength. It was not a pleasant feeling to be pierced by arrows all over like a hedgehog. Some Diyu soldiers had slowed down. They still had strength, but they no longer had the will to fight. On the hill in the middle of the camp, a few Ling dynasty generals around Han Xian laughed out loud and complimented Han Xian. "Chief Marshal, that Baiqi's tactics are just SOSO. When his soldiers are tired, our elite soldiers will attack them from the front, and we'll be able to destroy at least half of his army. Han Xian's lips curled up into a faint smile. Then he cursed. What a bunch of stupid pigs. Do you think Baiqi is so easy to deal with? Can't you see that he is still standing still in front of the broken wall? Be on your guard at all times, and let's see what other tricks he has up his sleeves. Soon another hour had passed. More than 10,000 DU soldiers who attacked Han Xian's camp from both flanks had been killed. They were unlucky enough to be shot in the head by arrows, and the exploding arrows had blown their skulls to pieces, completely ending their lives. As for the other soldiers, they had been wounded countless times by the explosions, and some even had their arms and legs blown off. But, nourished by the Pangu's sacred energy, they had regrown their limbs and continued to join the battle. But the repeated wounds and severe pain had tired them out, and the speed and frequency of their attacks were now several times slower than when they had just launched the attack at noon. Some soldiers even stood hesitantly at the back of the line, and had not charged for a long time. On the hill, Han Xian glanced at Baiqi, who was standing in the distance. He clapped his hands lightly, and a general next to him immediately took out the dragon horn and blew it. The shrill and unpleasant sound of the horn rose straight into the sky, followed by the muffled sound of footsteps. In the camp of Ling Dynasty, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, who had rested for a whole afternoon, slowly left their barracks in heavy armors. In the air above the camp, they formed thousands of small, sharp formations, slowly pressing towards the great Yu army on both flanks like hungry wolves who were ready to pounce. Oracles of the Ling Dynasty floated above the army, their palms constantly sprinkling down large numbers of bone talismans. Ghost howls rose from all directions, covering the bodies of these Ling Dynasty soldiers with a faint layer of ghost fire, which had a certain defensive and corrosive power, while wisps of dark fire shone out of their eyes. Hundreds of thousands of Ling Dynasty soldiers breathed deeply and deeply at the same time. Their breaths turned into a strong gale, blowing up the sand and dust on the ground. The hesitation and fear in the hearts of these soldiers were dispelled by the magic of the oracles, and the strong will of fighting and the desire of killing had taken control of their minds. These soldiers of the Ling Dynasty had transformed into hundreds of thousands of bloodthirsty beasts, barely maintaining their last trace of sanity and joining the battle. Muffled drumbeats rang out. Behind the battle formation of the Yu army on both flanks, a large number of oracles in black robes appeared. They, too, sprinkled out large numbers of bone talismans and cast all kinds of defensive spells on these soldiers of the Du army. Some oracles were even incanting spells with shrill voices, sprinkling a large amount of blood-red light to dispel the fatigue of these soldiers and boost their morale, so that they would have the strength to continue the battle. With the help of the oracles, these soldiers of the Du army, who were already exhausted, were filled with energy as if they had a sudden recovery before death. Roaring, they rushed towards the camp of the Ling Dynasty. The rain of arrows had stopped, and the soldiers of the Ling Dynasty in the caves had fled back to the camp through the underground tunnel. Only hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers of the Ling Dynasty, who had reached the peak of their physical strength and morale, were marching slowly towards them. In the blink of an eye, the armies of both sides were tangled up in a fierce battle. Spears, blades, and swords tore through the air, shredding all the enemies in front of them. The generals of both sides were fighting one-on-one, while the low-ranking officers were fighting crazily with their soldiers, and blood was spilled all over the ground. Over 1 million soldiers of both sides were entangled in a fierce battle, while the oracles of both sides had also joined the battle in the sky. Fire, lightning, ice, wind, and snow swept across the land, throwing and shredding many soldiers into the air. Some of them had their faces suddenly turned black, some were bleeding from their 7 apertures, some were spitting out their tongues, and some were bleeding from their internal organs. Faced with the strange spells cast by the oracles, the soldiers of both sides were either killed or wounded. Han Xian frowned. The strength of the soldiers of the Du army was beyond his imagination. Basically, it would take 2 to 3 soldiers of the Ling Dynasty army to fight against 1 soldier of the Du army. After a quarter of an hour of fighting, over 100,000 soldiers of the Ling Dynasty army had been killed or wounded. Although over 90,000 wounded soldiers soon returned to the battlefield, their overall strength had been greatly weakened. The blades of the soldiers of the Dayu army were tinged with a strange blue color. It was a deadly poison concocted by the oracles of the Dayu army. Once they were injured by the poison weapons, even if they could recover quickly with the help of the Panga's sacred energy, they would still lose 20 to 30% of their energy. As the battle went on, although the soldiers of the Dayu army were exhausted, they were gradually gaining the upper hand. Poison weapons? Han Xian raised his long brows and sneered. Why didn't the oracles of the Ling dynasty concoct this poison? The generals of the Ling dynasty looked at each other, speechless. All the spells of the oracles of the Ling dynasty were taught to them by the immortals of the celestial court. In order to better control the Ling dynasty and prevent the Ling dynasty from evolving into another Dayu army, the immortals of the celestial court were not so stupid as to pass down all the spells of the human race they knew. The poisons on the weapons of the soldiers of the Dayu army not only had a very good effect on weakening the human soldiers, but also had a terrible lethality to the fragile bodies of the immortals. Unless the immortals of the celestial court had a cramp in their brains, they would not even have the time to destroy the recipes of these terrible poisons. How could they teach the oracles of the Ling dynasty army? Han Xian spread his hands helplessly and said with a bitter smile, I understand now. Well, the soldiers are not as good as the Dayu army, and the weapons and armaments are not as good as the Dayu army. If I did not have a set of military formations, I'm afraid this army would have long been wiped out by Dayu army. How dare they clamor about overthrowing and replacing Dayu army with such a weak foundation? The generals of the Ling dynasty did not dare to answer. Han Xian's complaints were not directed at the Ling dynasty, but more at some people in the celestial court. Since Han Xian dared to say something like that, he must have a strong backing. But if these generals dared to say that, they would probably disappear in a few days. After complaining for a while, Han Xian shook his head, shook his hand, and shot a fireball into the sky. The white fireball rose tens of miles high with a long tail of smoke trailing behind it, then exploded and turned into a dazzling ball of light in the sky. The flame lasted for a long time without dissipating, and suddenly, a wild battle cry came from the surrounding woods. Countless cultivators, the strongest of whom were only nascent divinity cultivators, darted out of the woods in the distance, riding sword beams and rushing into the army of Dayu army. These cultivators hacked their sword beams randomly in all directions, detonated all kinds of thunders and spirit talismans in their hands, and then detonated their own nascent divinity. Although these cultivators had low cultivation bases, the power they produced when they detonated themselves was extremely shocking. There was a strange fishy smell in the blood-red light they produced. When the nearby soldiers of Dayu army smelled the smell, they instantly felt their bones go numb, and some of them simply fell to the ground, unable to move, letting the soldiers of Ling dynasty cut off their heads like chopping melons and vegetables. Tens of thousands of cultivators rushed into the army of Dayu army. Their thunders and spirit talismans killed or wounded tens of thousands of soldiers of Dayu army, and their self-detonation smashed the army of Dayu army into pieces. The strange smell emanating from their bodies was similar to Wuxia's drunken dragon incense. The soldiers of Dayu army collapsed to the ground in rows, and could do nothing but watch as the soldiers of Ling dynasty wielded their weapons and hacked at them. Frowning, Baichi watched his soldiers wavering, then snapped, Han Xian, how shameless of you! How could you use poison? Han Xian snorted coldly, and gave Baichi a mocking glance. Baichi suddenly realized that the blades of Dayu army's soldiers were also coated with poison. No one said a word, because Han Xian was not the only one who used poison. Immediately, Baichi corrected himself and said, You've even used these low-level cultivators. Is there no one else in Ling dynasty who can do this? Han Xian laughed disapprovingly and said, Only by using these low-level cultivators to defeat the army led by Baichi can I show off my skills. Laughing aloud, Han Xian pointed his finger out, and 9 white fireballs shot straight up into the sky. Amidst the deafening explosions, battle cries came from all directions at the same time. More than 200,000 cultivators, who had been hiding in the forest with various escape techniques, charged out in a frenzy. Just like the cultivators who exploded themselves just now, they activated their Een Thunder talismans and rushed into the army, then exploded their nascent souls and nascent divinities. Streams of spirit light flickered in the air, and the true spirits of these cultivators were sucked away by the light. The army was in a complete mess. The soldiers' steps were weak and feeble, and they did not even have the strength to turn around and flee. The soldiers of Ling Dynasty mercilessly killed the army's soldiers, one after another. Baiqi's face turned blue with anger, and he waved his hand forcefully. Meanwhile, Han Xian said carelessly, "Baiqi, this is how I, Han Xian, command my soldiers. Even if they are just a bunch of trash, as long as there are enough of them, I can use them to defeat all the enemies in front of me. Do you have any more tricks up your sleeves? If not, I'll give the order to launch an all-out attack." Baiqi snickered and turned around to look. A Taoist, clad in a green robe and with a bone structure as delicate as an ancient pine, walked slowly out of the city. Chapter 1004. Han Xian trembled with anger. Gnashing his teeth, he pointed at Baiqi and Mu Wang, then turned and left with the generals and the immortals around him. Therefore, the immortals of today were feared by the heavenly Tao, while the ancient immortals were tolerated by the heavenly Tao, who often rewarded them with virtues. The soldiers of the Ling Dynasty were finally thrown into confusion. No one knew who shouted first, but the hundreds of thousands of soldiers abandoned their armaments and fled. The Ling Dynasty soldiers, whose cultivation bases had reached the realm of the second Pangu heaven and the first Pangu heaven, ran as fast as the wind and vanished in the blink of an eye. The more the soldiers summoned by Han Xian, the better. Their cultivation bases were low, and they could not run fast enough or defeat the enemy. But they quickly knelt on the ground and put their hands over their heads in surrender. Han Xian's face was unsightly. The Ling Dynasty general who shot the arrow was a second Pangu heaven cultivator, and his bow was a precious treasure forged by the celestial court. Even a peak-level gold immortal would be killed by it. But Mu Wang, with his mere cultivation base of a 36th tier heaven immortal, was able to deflect the arrow with just a finger. His divine ability and magic were truly exquisite. Shrouded in billowing black smoke, 4,900 puppet warriors rushed to the forefront, slashing down countless soldiers of the Ling Dynasty like a rain of blades. The divine man beside Mu Wang was about to step in front of Mu Wang, but Mu Wang chuckled and stopped him. Casually, Mu Wang reached out his right hand and pointed his finger at the arrow, which was less than 10 feet away from him. The arrow disappeared abruptly, and then a golden light reappeared, appearing in front of the Ling Dynasty general who had shot the arrow. The general shrieked with fright and twisted his body, letting the arrow pierce through his right chest with a shrill whistle. Blood splattered everywhere. The arrow pierced through the general's body and sank heavily into the ground in front of Han Xian, piercing through the small hill that everyone was on. Baiqi roared with laughter. He gave a few orders in a row, and the soldiers of Du cheered thunderously. They picked up the bows and crossbows abandoned by the soldiers of Ling Dynasty, and led by dozens of generals, they chased after the fleeing army of Ling Dynasty. Along with a series of muffled bangs, 4,900 puppet warriors reappeared in the ranks of Ling Dynasty warriors. A total of 4,900 puppet warriors swayed in the wind, then abruptly turned into a puff of smoke and dissipated. Following that, a series of banging noises could be heard as these warriors darted out from the ranks of the Ling Dynasty soldiers. With a slight swipe of the sharp blades in their hands, 4,900 heads rose into the sky. In the west, half of the face of the setting sun had sunk into the bottom of the mountain. The setting sun was like blood, making the bloody light especially dazzling. A few sighs could be heard coming from the void. Mu Wang, an ancient immortal, had actually turned the tide of the battlefield. Judging from the way he followed behind the Taoist in green, he was clearly some kind of bodyguard. The ancient immortals followed a very different cultivation system from those immortals who were greedy and crazily plundering the resources of heaven and earth. Their magic power was not strong, but their cultivation was very high. Almost all of them had reached the realm where their words were the law, and all kinds of divine abilities and mystic arts were very powerful. They had an endless lifespan, but they used it to explore the mysteries of heaven and earth instead of using it to enhance their own cultivation. His soldiers had fled, and Han Xian had no interest in fighting Baiqi alone. With all his soldiers gone, even if Han Xian could kill Baiqi, he could not possibly go deep into Du alone and attack cities and territories. There was no such thing. Wu Qi's divine sense swept across the deity. Judging from his extremely pure and powerful bloodline, he should be a demigod born from the first generation of gods and human beings after the creation of heaven and earth. At the same time, he possessed the ability to directly control the power of heaven and earth, as well as the endless development potential of the human race. His overall strength had reached the level of 9th-tier primordial immortal, coupled with his armor and halberd, which were emanating a strange aura, and his special bloodline. Perhaps even a primordial immortal who was 2 or 3 tiers higher than him could not fight against him. Staring fixedly at Baiqi, Han Xian raised his hand and twirled it in the air. A dull drumbeat rang out, and the disordered soldiers of the Ling dynasty immediately retreated to the center of the camp, forming a purely defensive circular formation. Heavy tower shields were carried out by the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, which smashed heavily into the ground and formed a 30 feet tall steel wall. A large number of bows and crossbows equipped by the soldiers of the Ling dynasty shot out through the openings reserved on the tower shields, forcibly blocking the pursuit of the soldiers of Du. Before his voice had died away, Muwang was already laughing. With a casual point of his finger, the ashes of the puppet warriors suddenly rose into the air. Accompanied by a harsh whistling sound, the ashes formed new puppet warriors. The new puppet warriors were pitch black in color, and their bodies were like smoke and mist, making them look like ghosts. Just now the puppet warriors still had real bodies, but now they were completely made of smoke. With a shrill whistle, they picked up the blades that had fallen to the ground and moved as fast as a breeze through the ranks of the soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Wherever they passed, blood and flesh flew in all directions. Whether it was the soldiers or the generals of the Ling dynasty, none of them could withstand a light blow from the thin blades. Wherever the blades passed, limbs flew in all directions, and one head after another was cut by arrows of blood. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of soldiers of the Ling dynasty were killed on the spot. Han Xian's face flickered slightly. He pointed at Muwang, the Taoist in green, and cried out, "Shoot him!" Before Han Xian could give another order, Muwang pulled out a stack of thin paper from under his sleeve and threw them into the air. Shouts and shouts could be heard coming from all directions. The paper was so thin that it was almost transparent, and all of them were cut into the shape of human figures. Thousands of paper pieces swayed in the wind and shot out balls of golden light, which transformed into a skinny warrior who stood 12 feet tall, clad in a thin armor and holding a sharp blade in his hand. Han Xian laughed delightedly and said, "Blue Smoke Spirit Lord, your magic is indeed more profound." Behind Han Xian, a general of the Ling dynasty walked quickly out. He was holding a large bow that was almost as tall as a man, and knocked a pure gold arrow that was as thick as a child's arm. A muffled sound rang out, and a golden light burst out as the arrow shot straight toward Mu Wang's heart. The power of this arrow was frighteningly great. As the arrow tore through the air, it tore open a 10 feet wide fissure in the ground, and all living beings in its path were shredded to pieces by the shockwaves brought about by the sword light. But this time, an immortal clad in a red Taoist robe, who stood next to Han Xian, finally made his move. He gave a long cry as his red Taoist robe suddenly fluttered. Countless fist-sized fire ravens flew out with sharp and unpleasant screeches, shooting across the sky with a high temperature. The puppet warriors were caught unprepared, and were pierced through by the fire ravens. Their bodies began to burn rapidly, and in just a blink of an eye, they were turned into ashes and fell to the ground. The faces of these warriors were blurred, and it was obvious that they were not living beings, but puppets. Their armors were dull and did not look like anything good, but the sharp blades in their hands were very eye-catching. They shone brightly as if they were made of crystal. Their reed-like shape was not suitable for hacking, but for cutting. Han Xian shuddered as he cried out, "Kill them!" Baiqi cupped his fist and bowed to the Taoist in indigo. Muwang. Obviously, these blades were also forged with a secret art, and were specially used to deal with warriors who practiced the cultivation techniques of the human race. Han Xian pointed a finger at the puppet warriors. And just as he was about to issue an order to gather the crossbows to kill them, the puppet warriors abruptly transformed into wisps of smoke again. Then, a series of bangs rang out as these warriors emerged from other places. With a swing of their blades, another 4,900 heads fell to the ground. The bangs kept ringing out as these warriors came and went in the army of the Ling dynasty like ghosts. Every time they appeared, they could kill 4,900 elite soldiers of the Ling dynasty. The Taoist nodded slightly. Without saying a word, he slapped a fist-sized, green calabash hanging from his waist. The stopper on the calabash was opened, and a stream of clear water with a strong smell of herbs sprayed out. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a drizzle and enveloped the whole battlefield. A fragrance filled the air, and the strange fishy smell emanating from the blood of the self-detonated cultivators of the Ling dynasty was neutralized by the smell of herbs. The Yu's soldiers suddenly regained all their energy. They roared excitedly, wielded their weapons, and fought the soldiers of the Ling dynasty again. After flashing 10 times like this, the Ling dynasty had lost 49,000 soldiers. Han Xian was so angry that he almost coughed blood. Mu Wang's secret art was really strange and unpredictable. Although the aura of these puppet warriors was not very strong, their attacking methods were too strange. Obviously, the blades in their hands were magical items that had been thoroughly tempered, and had even subdued the body-strengthening cultivation technique practiced by the human race. Even the most ordinary soldiers of the Ling dynasty had fleshly bodies harder than steel, but before these specially made blades, their bodies were as fragile as tofu. Clad in a thin green robe, the Taoist walked slowly to Baiqi's side, nodded smilingly at Han Xian, who was standing on the hill in the distance. A three-eyed celestial being, standing 3 feet tall, clad in a golden Qilin heaven-devouring armor, and holding a coiling dragon halberd, stood guard beside the Taoist. His body looked like a shadow made of wind and fire, and from time to time, a dull roar of wind and fire could be heard coming out of him. His body was half real and half incorporeal, and he looked very intimidating. There was a clear circle of meritorious light, 3 feet in diameter, hovering behind the old Taoist's head. His whole body was shrouded in a faint purple mist, and he was full of energy essence. When he walked, it seemed that the wind and clouds around him moved with him. His every move was accompanied by an immortal aura. Compared to him, the immortals of today were like butchers who butchered pigs and sold meat. Their behavior was vulgar and greedy, and they could not be compared at all. Wuxia could not help but sigh softly. Was this the power of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong? How could an ancient immortal, whose cultivation base was only at the level of 36th tier of heaven immortal, be accompanied by a primordial deity as his guard? What was so great about this Taoist? In order to repay the kindness of heaven and earth, the ancient immortals would do their best to maintain the balance of nature. They planted trees, planted grasses, bred all kinds of rare flowers and trees, and even opened up silted rivers to maintain the life cycle of nature. They were kind-hearted and rarely fought with people, and they were not good at killing animals. Basically, every ancient immortal was an expert in the art of medicine, and their favorite thing to do was to travel the world and benefit the world with virtue. Chapter 1005. The sound of horses neighing rang out as Mu Wang pulled out a wooden carriage model from his sleeve. He tossed it onto the ground, and an earthy light flashed as a 4-wheeled chariot drawn by 3 horses appeared before Baiqi and the others. The chariot was tens of feet in circumference, large enough to accommodate dozens of people. Baiqi boarded the chariot with all the captains, surrounded by Mu Wang, and quickly chased after Han Xian's fleeing army. 3 lifelike wooden horses threw their heads back and roared into the sky. Every time their hooves knocked on the ground, a circle of yellow light would spread out. Pulled by them, the chariot moved like a gust of wind, and soon caught up with Yu's soldiers who were chasing after the chariot. From the chariot, Baiqi kept issuing orders, and the Great Yu army, which had been chasing after the chariot on their own, immediately regrouped and lined up into a formation of 9 sharp cones, charging forward fiercely. At the 2 flanks of the cone-shaped formation, there were soldiers with heavy shields protecting them. At the center of each formation was a group of black-clothed oracles. The formation protected these oracles in the middle, preventing them from being attacked in the chaos. In the spirit cave under East Sea City, Wuxia nodded and said, "Huang Liang, you have to see it clearly. Even if the enemy is defeated, you have to be prepared to fight back at any time when you are chasing after them. Han Xian's strategy is not so simple." Huang Liang nodded thoughtfully as he looked at the fleeing and chasing armies on the light screen. Narrowing his eyes, Wuxia smiled faintly. He glanced around at the civil and military officials of East Sea, who were watching the battle on the light screen with rapt attention. Then, he sent all kinds of military books and countless examples of battles from his memory into their spiritual oceans. In the heaven refining cauldron, the Xianyuan sword suddenly let out a deep sword cry, and a terrible aura of killing spread out in the spirit cave. Except for Wuqi, Princess Zhonglu, and Yixia, all the others trembled, and their hair stood on end. Closing his eyes, Wuqi immersed his mind in the heaven refining cauldron. The transformation of these treasures of virtue was almost complete, especially the Xianyuan sword. Under Wuqi's skillful hands, it had turned from a sword of the way of the king into a downright dominating sword, a pure sword of slaughter. A terrible killing intent surged in the spirit cave, and countless examples of battles were rolling in Huang Liang and the other spiritual oceans. The killing intent stimulated their minds and drew them into the endless war plans. Comparing the examples of battles taking place on the light screen, the eyes of Huang Liang and the others flickered, as if they had learned something. A fierce aura of war spread out from their bodies, as if countless soldiers were roaring furiously in the spirit cave. The Diyu army, led by Baiqi, had been chasing after the defeated soldiers of the Ling dynasty for 4 hours. After running for over 2,000 miles, the terrain in front of them gradually leveled off, revealing a vast area of hills. The remaining hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Ling dynasty fled into the hills, and the soldiers of Diyu, who were in high spirits, plunged into the hills as well. A deep laughter suddenly came from all directions, and then a clear voice of a man rang out. "Daqin has killed Wang Baiqi? I've been waiting for you for a long time." Clad in a white crane cloak, with a sword hanging from his waist and a feather fan in his hand, Xiaohe descended slowly from a cloud in the sky. He glanced at Baiqi from tens of miles away. His 3 pupils spun rapidly, and a large number of strange patterns of light appeared in his eyes. The natural energy within 1,000 miles of him fluctuated chaotically. With a wave of his hand, Xiaohe shone brightly in the hills around him, while numerous restrictive runes emerged from the ground like blooming flowers. Accompanied by a deep rumble of natural energy, a huge restrictive formation sealed off the void within a radius of 10,000 miles, preventing anyone below the level of primordial immortal from flying. A loud rumble rang out from the ground, and the earth rumbled as a neat and clean rock formation, 100 miles long, a mile thick, and 3,000 feet high, rose whistling out of the ground, blocking the back of Baiqi's chariot and cutting off the retreat of Baiqi and the others. Then, accompanied by a deafening rumble, 3 more rock formations emerged from the ground, forming an impenetrable city with the first rock formation, and surrounding the hills. Nearly 100,000 routed Ling dynasty soldiers, and all Diyu's pursuers were trapped in the city wall, which measured 100 miles in both width and length. The high and thick rock stratum was densely engraved with countless rune formations, and a thick curtain of light wrapped around the rock stratum. There was no need to attempt to attack. Everyone who witnessed all this knew how strong the defensive power of the rock stratum was. Ambushes had been set up in all directions, and more than 1 million Ling dynasty soldiers rushed out of countless caves like ants in a nest. Shouting and yelling, they rushed up to the city which Xiaohe had raised from the ground with a great amount of magic. All kinds of heavy ordnance were neatly stacked on the wall, locking onto the hundreds of thousands of Diyu soldiers in the city. Baiqi's expression flickered slightly as he sneered and said, "Han Xian, little boy, can you lure Baiqi here with the lives of so many soldiers?" Han Xian slowly flew up into the sky, looked at Baiqi and said with a smile, "The merciful do not lead the army." In order to wipe out King of Wuan's army and boost the morale of the Ling dynasty, what's the big deal about sacrificing some soldiers? Inside the city, nearly 100,000 Ling dynasty soldiers, who were also trapped in the city, were howling and howling. They were desperately pounding the wall in front of them, crying and begging their colleagues on the wall to let them out. The heavy ordnance on the wall glowed coldly. Once an attack was launched, this 100-mile-long hill would certainly turn into a hell. But the faces of the soldiers on the wall did not change at all. Even when a general of the one-star realm of the second Pengu heaven tried to jump onto the wall, a general on the wall slashed him back to the ground without hesitation. With a smile, Han Xian pointed at the soldiers of Du and said, "Sons of the Ling dynasty, if you want to live, fight them with all your might. Kill them all, and you can live, and you will have made a great contribution. You will be rewarded with high positions, generous salaries, wine and beauties. Fight with all your might. If anyone can kill Baichi, he will be promoted 3 ranks on the spot. I, Han Xian, will keep my word." With a few strange laughs, Han Xian said in a gloomy voice, "If you don't fight with all your might, if you surrender or escape from this city, you will be regarded as traitors. Not only will you be punished by military law, but your parents and wives will also be demoted to slaves. If your wives and daughters are good-looking, they may be sent to the musical house, and your comrades in arms who have made meritorious service will dote on them." Standing on the chariot, Baichi looked at Han Xian 100 miles away and said with a sneer, "Han Xian, don't you think this is too sinister?" Han Xian folded his arms over his chest, looked at Baichi coldly and said with a smile, "As long as I can defeat Wang Baichi of Daqin, what's the big price?" Suddenly he snapped, "What are you waiting for? Where is the fighting pill distributed to you before the battle? Everyone take the fighting pill and fight the enemy with all your might." A roar like that of a wounded beast was heard. The general of the Ling dynasty, who had just tried to jump onto the wall but was cut down by his colleague, pulled out a thumb-sized blood-colored pill from under his collar. He looked back at Han Xian with a venomous glare before swallowing the pill in one gulp. A miserable howl rang out, and blood-red flames spurted out from the 7 orifices of the general. His body swelled up to 30 feet tall amidst the terrifying crackling of his bones. His muscles swelled up, and even the armor on his body burst apart. At this moment, the general, who was only in the realm of the 1 star of the second Pengu heaven, suddenly burst out with an aura equivalent to the peak of the 9 stars realm. He transformed into a blood-colored bolt of lightning, dashed across a dozen miles, and hacked down at the soldiers of Du, who had lined up in a square formation. With a deafening clang, dozens of heavy shields and iron armor shattered, and nearly 100 soldiers of Du were chopped to pieces. The soldiers of Du were only in the realm of the 8 or 9 stars of the first Pengu heaven. Facing the attack of the peak of the second Pengu heaven, they were as fragile as tofu. When the soldiers of Du saw this, they all took out blood-colored pills from under their collars and stuffed them into their mouths. Shrill howls rang out as blood-colored flames sprayed out of the 7 apertures of all the soldiers of Ling dynasty. At least 70,000 soldiers were burned to ashes, but the remaining 20,000 soldiers, like the general, expanded to about 30 feet tall, transformed into blood-colored bolts of lightning, and charged at the army of Du. Above the city, Han Xian stood on a cloud that kept flashing with a bright light. "Tell those monsters of the forbidden clans that the death rate after taking this pill is too high," he said coolly. "How could so many soldiers die in a real battle? Well, this formation is very powerful. Even with the help of this flying treasure, I've consumed 30% of my energy. Xiaohe, can you lower the power of the formation a little?" Xiaohe smiled. Hovering under his feet was also a cloud that was flashing with a bright light. All right, don't complain about this," he said coolly. "We've already gained a great advantage by being able to fly within the range of the formation. Well, if we can kill Baichi today, that would be great." Han Xian was taken aback. He gave Xiaohe a look in shock, then turned to look at Baichi, who was commanding the soldiers to resist the attack of the Ling dynasty soldiers. Suddenly he grinned and said, "Isn't that right? If we can kill Baichi, or capture him alive, that would be great. Well, attack." With a wave of his hand, the drums on the city walls began to beat like thunder, while countless arrows, talismans, flames, and thunderbolts swept across the battlefield like a storm, regardless of the tens of thousands of Ling dynasty soldiers who were still in the city. All of a sudden, Muwen gave a long roar. As he waved his sleeves, a green banana leaf rose into the sky and transformed into a green mist that enveloped the Du army. Arrows, talismans, and other weapons exploded the mist, making it tremble. Flames and thunderbolts tore large cracks in it. But the green mist was inexhaustible. It rose and fell, blocking the fierce attacks of the Ling dynasty, and firmly protecting the Du soldiers down below. Baiqi grinned in a weird way. Suddenly he waved his hand towards the sky. A dark sphere of flame rose into the sky along with shrill ghost howls. Boom! A dark sphere of flame exploded in the night sky. The night had just fallen, and the surroundings were dark. But the dark flame was so dazzling in the night sky that it could be clearly seen from tens of thousands of miles away. 4 supreme towers abruptly emerged from behind the 4 city walls of the city. Bright light poured down, and from the light, troops of heavily armored Du soldiers rushed out. Each supreme tower was loaded with over 1 million Du soldiers. They formed orderly battle formations and firmly surrounded the 100-mile square city from all directions. Accompanied by shrill ghost howls, the black arrows of light fell from the sky. Wherever they passed, the walls crumbled and the earth cracked, while raging flames and poisonous smoke blanketed the world. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty howled and shrieked under the rain of black arrows, and thousands of them were killed with every snap of a finger. Baiqi's backup plan had arrived. Chapter 1006. Inside and outside the city, the battle cries were deafening. Baiqi was never a kind-hearted man. As soon as the 4 supreme towers brought his ambush army to the battlefield, he immediately launched a counterattack against the Ling dynasty army. From all directions, millions of Great Yu army soldiers launched tide-like attacks on the city. Arrows and talismans tore the void apart and made the thick city wall tremble. A group of generals around Baiqi made their moves, cooperating with the elite soldiers to fight the Ling dynasty soldiers who had taken the warlord pill. The generals around Baiqi were all elites of Daqin dynasty. Over the years in the East Sea, with the wholehearted support of Wuxia, at least nearly 100 generals around Baiqi were now strong enough to step into Hongming Panga heaven at any time, while most of the others were at the peak of the second Panga heaven. With their overall strength and the hundreds of thousands of Du soldiers, they steadily blocked the path of the Ling dynasty soldiers who had taken the warlord pill and turned mad, wearing out their energy bit by bit. The explosive power of these Ling dynasty soldiers was extremely strong, but the warlord pill was a great power that overdrew their spirit blood. In just a quarter of an hour, all Ling dynasty soldiers exploded and died at the same time. After a quarter of an hour of fighting, no more than 1,000 Du soldiers were killed or wounded. But these 20,000 Ling dynasty soldiers exploded, sending their blood and body parts across 100 miles in radius. Over 100,000 Du soldiers were stained by the blood that sprayed out when they exploded. The corrosive blood burned through their bodies, and a strange poison spread in their bodies, killing their souls. 100,000 elite soldiers fell to the ground. Their bodies melted quickly and turned into dark, sticky, poisonous liquid, burning the ground and making it sizzle. The people who witnessed all this were shocked. Han Xian murmured in a low voice. Those monsters from the forbidden clans, the things they concoct are indeed vicious. We have to be careful when dealing with them in the future. We can never take the pills they concoct. Xiaohe's face was also full of fear. He sighed in a low voice and said, "We can talk about the pills of the forbidden clans later. What do we do now?" This bastard Baiqi actually used supreme high priests to transport the ambush troops. This was simply preposterous. All the supreme oracles of the Ling dynasty have eyes on their foreheads, and it is impossible to count on them to help us. Why are the supreme oracles of Du so obedient? Han Xian was furious as well. If he had a few supreme oracles of the Ling dynasty to help him, he would have definitely devised more vicious traps to kill Baiqi. But the few supreme oracles of the Ling dynasty were extremely proud and arrogant. Even Zhang Tingyun had to be polite to them, and Han Xian could not mobilize any of them to help him in the battle. Han Xian's jealousy and resentment went without saying when he saw that there were 4 supreme oracles around Baiqi to help him transport the soldiers. Baiqi narrowed his eyes and looked at Han Xian and Xiaohe in the distance. Through the movement of their lips, Baichi could see what they were saying. Baichi could not help but burst into wild laughter, his voice full of pride and arrogance. The supreme oracles of Diyu were very proud, and they did not like the courtiers of the 6 states. But the emperor of Daqin, Yingzheng, was the reincarnation of Emperor Yangsu, the sacred emperor of the human race. As Yingzheng's confidant, which supreme oracle of Diyu dared not to give Baichi face when he issued a military order. All the provisions and other supplies of Baichi's army were stored in the supreme towers of some supreme oracles, not to mention the soldiers. Huanpanga continent had the ability to use supreme oracles as the logistics and transportation team. Full of enthusiasm, Baichi drew his sword and cried out, "Boys, kill all the traitors of the Ling dynasty. Take no prisoners in this battle." The soldiers of the Ling dynasty, whose morale had fallen, could hardly resist the attacks of Diyu's army. What was even worse was that the 4 supreme oracles were casting spells to attack these ordinary soldiers from all 4 sides of the city wall, which was almost like cheating. Even though they were only using the most common spells, the 4 supreme oracles were still beating the millions of soldiers of the Ling dynasty, so hard that they could not even lift their heads. Amidst the shrill ghost howls, the black arrows of light came whistling down from the sky. All the soldiers of the Ling dynasty who were touched by the exploded black mist festered and died, and all their blood essence was sucked dry by the ghosts and deities hidden in the mist. The 4 supreme oracles stood proudly on the supreme towers that hovered in midair. With a casual point of their fingers, tens of thousands of arrows of light shot out and mercilessly harvested the lives of the soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Occasionally, some daring generals of the Ling dynasty would leap up and attack the 4 supreme oracles, but before they could get close to the supreme towers, they would shriek miserably and turn into pus and blood and die. If one were to look carefully with the Dharma eyes, one would find that the air around the 4 supreme towers was filled with billions of mosquitoes that were several times smaller than dust. These venomous goo bugs had turned into spiral-shaped clouds and protected the 4 supreme towers. If any enemy dared to come close, the goo bugs would immediately burrow into their 7 orifices and release their poison to kill them. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty on the walls were in a state of confusion, and they were about to be routed again. But Baichi himself flew up and lunged at Han Xian and Xiaohe. "Han Xian, boy, and that 3-eyed freak beside you. Is his name Xiaohe? Come and fight me, your grandpa Baichi. If I can't kill you with 3 strikes, hee, I'll let your remaining soldiers retreat safely. What do you say?" Without saying a word, Han Xian and Xiaohe turned and left. Baichi had the cultivation base of the 7 stars realm of the 3rd Pangu heaven, and his overall strength was strong enough to fight against a primordial immortal. Han Xian and Xiaohe were still a long way from the realm of primordial immortal. Unless they were out of their minds, they would not risk their lives to fight a fierce man like Baichi. Without saying a word, Han Xian and Xiaohe turned and fled. Dozens of generals of the Ling dynasty who were loyal to their master leaped up and tried to stop Baichi, but Baichi easily chopped off their heads with a sword. Now that Baichi's cultivation base had reached the realm of Hongmeng Pangu heaven, his sword strike was like an antelope hanging its horn. Although it was a killing move, it had a wonderful charm to it. The generals of the Ling dynasty who were killed even died with a smile on their faces. Baichi's sword strike was too beautiful. Han Xian and Xiaohe turned and fled, while Baichi laughed and chased after them in a beam of white light. The cloud that kept flashing under Han Xian and Xiaohe's feet was a flying magical treasure crafted by an almighty expert, and its speed was not slow. As Baichi's cultivation technique was not good at flying, he could only barely keep up with them. In the blink of an eye, they had traveled hundreds of miles. Han Xian and Xiaohe suddenly turned and looked at Baichi with a smile. Baichi's heart skipped a beat. Lao Tzu has been fooled. 2 shameless boys. How dare they use an army of 1,000,000 soldiers as bait? He cried out harshly. With a cold snort, Baichi turned and fled in the direction of the city. But when he had just flown hundreds of feet away, a jade-colored light sprinkled down from the sky, transforming into a crystal-clear and seemingly thin jade-colored ice wall that blocked in front of Baichi. Baichi's fist smashed on the ice wall. A crisp clang rang out. The counterforce, which was 3 times stronger than Baichi's punch, bounced back and broke Baichi's wrist immediately. Baichi was horrified. "Who are you?" he cried out sternly. A strong Pangu sacred energy rose from the ground and quickly wrapped up Baiqi's body, healing the injury on his wrist very quickly. The jade-colored ice wall appeared in all directions, transforming into a complicated formation in the shape of an 8 trigrams, trapping Baiqi in the center. The formation had a circumference of nearly 100 miles, and there was enough space for 2 people to fight inside. The jade-colored ice wall emitted a cold air, and soon, a thin layer of ice formed on the edge of Baiqi's sword. A silvery dragon roar echoed out, and a tiny and adorable jade-colored little dragon darted out of the void. A beautiful lady clad in a white Taoist robe, holding a jade-colored vase in her left hand and a 6-feet-long sword in her right hand, proudly trod on the back of the little dragon. She stared at Baiqi coldly and said, "Murderer Wang Baiqi? I'm Yulong, a true disciple of the Supreme Emperor Huang Xingtian, Sect Master Xianluo. I was ordered to kill you." Snorting coldly, Yulong shook her head and said, "A villainous man with bloody hands like yours should have perished long ago. Why do you still stay in the human world and wreak havoc?" Baiqi chuckled, raised his sword and said, "Don't try to show off your eloquence, little girl. I'm killing for His Majesty of Daqin for Daqin." Even though Baiqi has killed countless people, he did it in a righteous and honorable way. Lao Tzu has never killed people with schemes. Compared to you thieves and prostitutes who talk about morality, justice and righteousness, Lao Tzu's heart is pure and open. Yulong snorted coldly and said in a low voice, "Stubborn man, you deserve to die. If you can join the Ling dynasty." Baiqi raised his eyebrows. Having been a military officer for so many years, Baiqi was a real ruffian. Immediately he laughed and continued Yulong's words. "If I can join the Ling dynasty, can your mother marry Lao Tzu?" The jade dragon was so angry that her face turned purple. She let out a long roar, and the little jade dragon she was sitting on suddenly twisted its body, breaking through the void and arriving in front of Baiqi. Yulong wielded her sword and hacked fiercely towards Baiqi. The sword in her hand was a fully formed primordial divine weapon. The sword beam tore the void apart, and a vague silhouette of a dragon could be seen in it, incanting spells and making hand gestures, increasing the power of the sword beam by at least 2 times. Laughing coldly, Baiqi swung the sword and cried out, "Get lost! Where did this little girl come from? How dare you fight me?" A monstrous murderous aura rushed out. Yulong and Zai Ouyalong cried out at the same time. The strong and brutal murderous aura was not something that should exist in the mortal world. The silhouette of the dragon in her sword beam was disrupted, and the power of the sword beam was reduced by at least 70%. Baiqi's sword collided with Yulong's. A crisp sound rang out, and the primordial divine weapon flew out of Yulong's hand. Her right hand was smashed to a pulp, blood and flesh splashing in all directions, and her smooth purple-gold hand bone was full of cracks. What Baiqi was practicing was the body-strengthening technique of the human race, which belonged to the branch of body cultivators. And what Yulong was practicing was the orthodox code of Tao League, which belonged to the first class of Dharma cultivators. Was it not courting death for a Dharma cultivator to fight a body cultivator at close range with a sword? Yulong cried out in alarm. Zai Ouyalong twisted his body and quickly fled dozens of miles away with her. Baiqi's sword slashed out, narrowly missing the jade dragon's neck as it slid down. A ripping noise rang out as the sword hacked down from Yulong's back. Yulong's beautiful face turned deathly pale because of the pain. Furious, Yulong shook her left hand, and a tiny stream of jade-colored watery light shot out from the jade bottle, hitting Baiqi in a flash. Baiqi gave a muffled snort as his body was instantly frozen by a jade-colored xianbing. Chapter 1007. Jade Dragon Fairy was a peak-level gold immortal, and she held a chaotic spirit treasure, the Xianming crystal bottle, which had the power to freeze the void. She was the direct disciple of Huang Xingtian, the Tao League's Grand Master of Xianluo sect, who was a peak-level primordial immortal and a pivotal figure in the Tao League. In the 33 heavens of Tao League, 3 major sects were established on each day, and under each sect were 3 smaller sects: a direct disciple, an external disciple and a protector. Xianluo sect was the direct disciple of Huang Xingtian's Zenith Heaven sect, and the sect master of Zenith Heaven sect was Xianluo Hierarch's master. as well as the direct disciple of Qing Mei Daozu of Dao League. Therefore, Jade Dragon Fairy was a true descendant of Dao League, and Xianluo Hierarch liked her very much. That was why she held the Xianming crystal bottle, with her peak-level gold immortal cultivation base, and was an expert in formations. Ordinary primordial immortals were no match for her. But today, she was so angry with Baiqi that she foolishly swung her sword and fought Baiqi in close combat. As a result, she was seriously wounded by Baiqi with just 2 strikes. If her mount Xiaoyalong was not psychic and had the divine ability to travel through the void, she would have been killed by Baiqi. Furious, Jade Dragon Fairy immediately activated the Xianming crystal bottle. A stream of innate Xianming true water sprayed out and froze Baiqi in a thick block of ice. Every cell in his body was completely frozen, and even his soul was frozen into an ice cube. Except for a trace of warmth in his heart, which was still beating, Baiqi's body had turned into a block of ice both inside and out. If it were anyone else, even a body cultivator who specialized in body tempering, who was frozen by the Xianming true water, their souls would have perished by now, and even their bodies would have been frozen into ice shards. However, a monstrous killing intent within Baiqi's body resisted the terrifying cold energy of the nether true water, barely maintaining a trace of his life force. The heavily injured Jade Dragon Fairy rode Xiaoyalong back to Baiqi angrily. The air around Baiqi was frozen by the cold air, and the huge block of ice floated in the air, unable to move. Jade Dragon Fairy gritted her teeth and stared at Baiqi's shocked face in the transparent ice. She sneered. "How dare you be so rude? Today, I will make you suffer a fate worse than death." Trembling, she took out a few life-saving elixirs and stuffed them into her mouth. Then, she transformed 2 elixirs into 2 balls of spiritual energy, and wrapped them around her right arm and back. The Jade Dragon Fairy took a few deep breaths. The skin and flesh on her arm quickly grew back. The skin and flesh on her back that was cut off also recovered quickly. She gritted her teeth and sneered. "How dare a vulgar man from the mortal world hurt my precious body? You may not be able to avoid death, but you can't escape punishment either." Turning around, Jade Dragon Fairy smiled at Han Xian and Xiao He and said, "Generals, the enemy's general has surrendered. I'll go with you now and kill those 4 monsters one by one. As for the matter of wiping out the Great Yu army, it's up to you." Han Xian and Xiao He looked at each other in horror. What was Baiqi's cultivation base? He was the existence of Hongmeng Pangu Heaven, and his freakishly strong fleshly body could not even be damaged by a huge mountain. But now, he was frozen into a living dead by a stream of water released by the inconspicuous purifying bottle in Jade Dragon Fairy's hand. Both of them could not help but marvel inwardly. This was the power that a Dao sect should have. Even an ordinary peak-level gold immortal female disciple was protected by such a precious treasure. How could any other power have so many treasures to give to their disciples? Han Xian and Xiao He, who were frightened by Baiqi's pursuit, suddenly felt refreshed. They puffed out their chests and said with a smile, "As you said, as long as we kill those 4 old monsters, we'll deal with the rest." Jade Dragon Fairy smiled complacently. Just as she was about to bring Han Xian and Xiao He to wipe out the Great Yu army, Baiqi, who was sealed in the ice, suddenly opened his eyes. It was a pair of eyes without any black or white, completely formed by bloody light. A monstrous murderous aura burst out of the ice in the form of a blood mist. Inside Baiqi's body came the crazy cries of hundreds of millions of soldiers, as well as the shrill howls of countless beheaded soldiers before they died. Such a fierce murderous aura made Jade Dragon Fairy tremble. Xiao Yulong, who was sitting on her back, screamed and quickly fled into the void with Jade Dragon Fairy. A cracking sound rang out. In the horrified eyes of Xiao He and Han Xian, the Xianbing, which sealed Baiqi, had a few very fine cracks on it. From the cracks, a blood mist kept bursting out, turning into a twisted, hazy figure that hovered around Baiqi. Blood evil fighting soul. Han Xian gritted his teeth and gave a low growl. These were the blood evil fighting souls, which were formed by a matchless ferocious god who had killed countless people, and had been strengthened by the fighting will of countless iron-blooded soldiers. Just like those strange creatures of the Buddhist League, who were formed by the power of faith, they were born with killing and fighting will, and their only purpose in coming to this world was to fight and kill. Tens of thousands of blood-evil fighting souls threw their heads back and let out long howls, which made the cracks on the xianbing even clearer. Baiqi let out a strange laugh. His body was shrouded in a blood-red light, and his murderous aura was so strong that it almost seemed solid, forcing Han Xian and Xiao He to keep retreating. Even though they had retreated quickly, the murderous aura that was as sharp as a blade still tore several deep wounds on Han Xian and Xiao He's bodies, revealing their bones. Han Xian and Xiao He looked at each other in horror, and at the same time, they felt a strong sense of helplessness. Wang Baiqi, the murderous god, really deserves his reputation. Why did Baiqi have the cultivation base equivalent to that of a primordial expert, while they were only gold immortals? What kind of fate did Baiqi encounter in the East Sea that allowed him to cultivate to the realm of primordial so quickly? It's very cold. Baiqi's voice rang through the void. Little girl, I'm going to cut you into pieces. Amidst a cracking sound, the xianbing finally shattered. Baiqi, with a thin layer of ice still hanging on his skin, rushed out of the xianbing with a monstrous murderous aura, and slashed at the Jade Dragon Fairy, who was dozens of miles away. The Jade Dragon Fairy's face darkened. With a shake of her left palm, a jade-colored cold light shot out of the xianming crystal bottle, which turned into a thin ice wall in front of her. A loud boom rang out, and the ice wall trembled slightly. The sword beam that Baiqi had unleashed exploded into countless tiny fragments of energy, filling the air in a chaotic manner, and causing the ice wall that had sealed off this part of the void to make clanking sounds. Not allowing Baiqi to slash out a second time, the xianming crystal bottle sprayed out a large sheet of sparkling jade-colored water light, which turned into a huge net and swooped down, wrapping Baiqi in it again. It was different from the extremely thin line of water light the first time. This time, the water light covered an extremely wide area, and the amount of xianming true water was extremely large. Baiqi and the tens of thousands of blood-fiend fighting souls around him were sealed in ice. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not break free. The blood-colored mist wrapped around Baiqi and helped him eliminate at least 70% of the cold. Even so, he was still sealed in the xianbing, which was a few miles thick. The Jade Dragon Fairy gave a cold snort and cried out in a low voice, "Generals, quickly assemble the army and annihilate the Great Yu army. Yulong will kill the 4 supreme oracles, and then we'll deal with this peerless murderer. How many people has he killed? Why does he have such a bloody aura?" Han Xian and Xiao He smiled bitterly. Perhaps only God knew how many people Baiqi had killed. When he was still in the mortal world, he had killed 400,000 surrendered soldiers in the Battle of Chongping, and when he arrived on Myriad Immortals' planet, he had wiped out countless kingdoms and slaughtered countless natives. When he arrived on Panga continent, Baiqi was the vanguard of Daqin and the East Sea, and no one knew how many people he had killed. Just with his murderous aura, he was able to withstand the power of a chaotic spirit artifact. This Baiqi truly deserved the title of peerless murderer. Jade Dragon Fairy twisted her waist, and was about to drive Xiaoyalong toward the 4 supreme oracles when 2 thick arms suddenly wrapped around Jade Dragon Fairy's waist. An unpleasant laugh rang out. "Hee hee, what a beautiful girl. What do you think? This is what they call fate brings us together." Damn it, Lao Tzu has made it clear. Who dares to take Lao Tzu's descendants as mounts? Snatching the crystal bottle from Jade Dragon Fairy's hand, the man laughed complacently and said, "If you dare to ride Lao Tzu's descendants, Lao Tzu will ride you. TSK, you have a slender waist and long legs. It must be a pleasure to ride you. I'll whip Lao Tzu again and again until you scream miserably. Wonderful, wonderful. Hurry up and give birth to a baby for Lao Tzu." The man who emerged from behind Jade Dragon Fairy like a ghost and snatched the crystal bottle was none other than Ao Buzin. This guy had just unified the dragons, and he had taken away more than 90% of the best mounts from various powers. Out of sheer boredom, he wandered around, trying to find a few unlucky fellows to have fun with. When he saw that Jade Dragon Fairy dared to use dragons as mounts, Ao Buzin flew into a rage. Then his anger ignited the fire of lust, turning his anger into desire. Without hesitation, he put his arms around Jade Dragon Fairy and began to fondle her. The poor Jade Dragon Fairy was only a peak-level gold immortal, while Ao Buzin had stepped into the realm of Tao breaking. On top of that, He had regained the cultivation base he had in his previous life, and his divine abilities had reached an unfathomable level. Being hugged by Ao Buzin, the Jade Dragon Fairy was scared out of her wits and could not struggle. But the strange aura emanating from Ao Buzin made the blood in Jade Dragon Fairy's veins expand, and a feeling of lust rose in her heart. Han Xian and Xiao He were startled. Almost instinctively they cried out, "Let go of Jade Dragon Fairy, you evildoer!" Ao Buzin turned around and gave Han Xian and Xiao He a glare. Then, an enormous divine sense of a Tao-breaking expert surged toward them. Blood sprayed out from their 7 orifices, and they were knocked thousands of miles away by the invisible divine sense. Before they could figure out what had happened, they had fainted. Ao Buzin put his arms around Jade Dragon Fairy and kissed her impatiently. "Sweetheart, no one is in our way here. Let's hurry up and play with each other. You and I are brought together by fate. You are riding Lao Tzu's descendant, and now Lao Tzu is riding you. If this is not fate, what is it?" Suddenly, a green palm came whistling down from the sky. "Let go of my disciple, evildoer." A deep and powerful voice cried out furiously. It was Xianluo Hierarch, the Daoyuotian leader, who had personally come to rescue his disciple. At the same time, he wanted to take back the most precious treasure of Xianluo sect, the dark nether crystal vase. But Xianluo Hierarch had underestimated his own strength. He was so arrogant as to use the innate capturing technique to capture Ao Buzin with his nascent divinity. Looking coldly at the approaching hand, Ao Buzin pulled out the soul-splitting spear and thrust it forward. "Eat my spear, son of a bitch!" With a miserable howl, Xianluo Hierarch's hand shattered. Xianluo Hierarch, who was far away in the Daoyuotian, coughed up a mouthful of blood. The soul-splitting spear, which was designed to harm nascent divinity and souls, had nearly shattered Xianluo Hierarch's immortal soul. His immortal soul had suffered a severe injury, and his cultivation and magic power had dropped from the peak stage of primordial immortal to the 6th tier. Ao Buzin straightened his lower body and slammed into Jade Dragon Fairy's thigh, then roared furiously with the spear in his hand. "Who else dares to ruin Lao Tzu's plan?" Invisible waves of divine will were communicating in the void, while Wahuang clan's angry rebuke rang out in the ears of all the Dao-fusing experts. "This guy is the #1 scum of Pangu world." Chapter 1008. Beneath the blue sky and above the white clouds, Ao Buzin had a beautiful girl under his left arm, and a soul-splitting spear of chaos spirit artifact level in his right hand. His long black hair was fluttering like a great dragon, and he was emanating a chilling murderous aura. If it were anyone else, this would be a majestic scene of a king ruling over the world, but it was completely different when it came to Ao Buzin. With a lascivious smile on his face, Ao Buzin wiggled his lower abdomen 3 inches into the sky and laughed wildly. "Lao Tzu gave you a spear, so who else is going to fight Lao Tzu for a woman? Hee, spear after spear after spear. Who dares to come and try my treasure?" In the sky, the Dao-fusing experts withdrew their divine senses. They were all afraid that they would be unable to restrain their anger and kill Ao Buzin with a slap, which would violate the oath they had sworn. However, several of them had their eyes on Ao Buzin. After the godly conferment plan led by Dao League and Buddhist League was over, many of them were ready to settle scores with Ao Buzin, including a few female saints among the 18 saints. They would not be able to vent their anger if they did not kill this scum. If they allowed a bastard like Ao Buzin to successfully fuse with his Dao, Yao Ling and the other saints shuddered at the thought of the terrible consequences. The primordial ancestral dragon was so famous among the chaos fiend gods that everyone would flee upon hearing his name. They wished they could hack him into pieces. High up in the sky, a cluster of white clouds slowly converged into the figure of an old Taoist in a white robe. A beam of light wrapped around him. Holding a horsetail whisk, he looked coldly at Ao Buzin and said softly, "Evil creature, release senior brother Xianluo's disciple, and I'll spare your life today. Otherwise, you'll die here today." Laughing strangely, Ao Buzin gave the Taoist a sidelong glance, then suddenly stuck out his tongue and licked Jade Dragon Fairy's fair and delicate face. The Jade Dragon Fairy shrieked in fright, while Ao Buzin burst into laughter. Where did this Taoist come from? Eat my spear. With a flash, Ao Buzan appeared behind the Taoist, his soul-splitting spear silently tearing through the void and stabbing toward the Taoist's back. As if he had sensed it, the Taoist casually swept his horsetail whisk backward. A loud clang rang out, and a bright light erupted from the Taoist's whisk before it suddenly exploded into pieces. The disdainful Taoist's expression flickered, and he split into dozens of figures that scuttled in all directions. Laughing hideously, Ao Buzan suddenly opened his mouth and spewed out a great plume of black, stinking dragon flame. Dozens of flames entangled those fleeing silhouettes. Miserable howls rose into the sky, and the other silhouettes turned into light and shadows one after another. Only one of the silhouettes twitched and struggled in the void, letting out hoarse and unpleasant howls. Ao Buzan burst into laughter, then flew to the figure on a cloud and stabbed the spear down. The figure suddenly split open, and a thumb-sized piece of yellow wood was shattered by the soul-splitting spear, turning into specks of yellow light that drifted down to the ground. Ao Buzan was taken aback, and then he cried out, "A stand-in puppet? Ugh, that horsetail whisk just now was just an ordinary heaven immortal artifact?" Realizing that he had been tricked from the beginning, Ao Buzan quickly turned around, but it was too late. A fist-sized meteor hammer, shaped like an 8-petaled lotus bud and surrounded by wisps of purple lightning, came whistling down from the sky and smashed into Ao Buzan's back. Ao Buzan's robe, which he had refined with 99 layers of dragon skin, was ripped to shreds, and the skin and flesh on his back were ripped to shreds. A loud rumbling noise rang out from his spine, as if the hammer had nearly broken his bones. A powerful electric current blasted into Ao Buzan's body, causing his muscles to tremble violently, and the high-frequency vibration almost disintegrated them. A cloud fell from the sky, enveloped the jade dragon fairy, and lifted her up into the air. A Taoist in a white robe appeared, and the meteor hammer with a thin chain that looked like it was condensed from starlight was hanging from his wrist. "Evil dragon, return Senior Brother Xianluo's treasure, the dark nether crystal bottle, at once, or I'll destroy your soul today," the Taoist said coldly. Ao Buzan twisted his body and took a deep breath, and the ferocious wound on his back healed in an instant. In his previous life he was Arko Zulong, famous for his strong physique and monstrous life force. In this life he had borrowed the opportunity when Wuxia formed his chaos incarnation to reform his Dharma body, and after Wuxia found the wisdom from his previous life, he inherited the heaven-refining grand magic from Wuxia. The heaven-refining grand magic was the body-tempering divine ability that Old Man Yuan Ling used to awe all chaos celestial gods. Although Ao Buzan did not have the heaven-refining cauldron to assist him in his cultivation, with his talent and comprehension, as well as the time acceleration in Dark Een Celestial Tower, he had cultivated this technique for hundreds of thousands of years. Although his current cultivation base was not as strong as in his previous life, his fleshly body was definitely stronger than in his previous life. Narrowing his eyes, Ao Buzan gave the meteor hammer a glance and said, "A chaos soul artifact? You made Lao Tzu feel a lot of pain. Too bad that you missed. If you had hit Lao Tzu's head, perhaps you could have killed Lao Tzu with one strike. Why did you hit his back?" The Taoist was struck dumb. The meteor hammer in his hand was called the Green Nightmare Thunder Hammer, and it was a chaos spirit artifact transformed from the innate wood primordial thunder. It was one of the 5 elements thunder hammers, and it was extremely powerful. But Ao Buzan was a freak, and his fleshly body was too strong. So when he was hit by the green damp thunder hammer, he only lost a little bit of his energy. Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan did not wait for the Taoist to answer his question. Instead, he suddenly let out a long roar, and his body abruptly transformed into a strange, pitch-black dragon with 9 claws under its abdomen. In the blink of an eye, he came next to the Taoist, reached out his claw and grabbed at the Taoist's head. Before the Taoist could unleash the green damp thunder hammer, his head was ripped open by Ao Buzan. The Taoist only had the cultivation base of peak stage primordial immortal, which was much weaker than Ao Buzan. Moreover, Ao Buzan had returned to his true form as Arko Zulong, who could fly as fast as lightning, and had a strong fleshly body. Close combat was Arko Zulong's strongest suit. Uncle Master Qin Kua. Jade Dragon Fairy cried out in horror. Laughing evilly, Aobuzin grabbed Daoist Qingke's body and shoved it into his mouth. Daoist Qingke's bones were crunched noisily by Aobuzin. Then he pointed a finger out and shot out an electric arc, hitting Daoist Qingke's immortal soul, which had transformed into a stream of purple mist and soared into the sky. Although Daoist Qingke's cultivation base of the realm of primordial immortal had lost more than half of his cultivation base when his immortal body was destroyed, as long as his immortal soul was intact, and he had enough spirit herbs to recover, he could slowly reform his immortal body. Although it would take him several eons of hard work to reform his immortal body, at least his foundation would not be harmed. But Aobuzin threw out a thunderbolt and hit Daoist Qingyun's immortal soul, causing it to explode with a deafening boom. A vast amount of purple mist scattered in all directions, and only the 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls at its core drifted away with the wind. Aobuzin opened his mouth excitedly and devoured Daoist Qingke's immortal soul. The enormous power of Daoist Qingke's immortal soul, which he had cultivated for countless years, was now at Aobuzin's disposal. His 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls transformed into a beam of bright light and shot into the sky. There was no chance for him to reform his immortal body, even if he wanted to go into seclusion now, so he could only enter transmigration or the list of deification. Obviously, the few Daozu had made up their minds for Daoist Qingke. Even if he entered transmigration and started cultivating again, it would take him a long time to become a primordial immortal. However, once he entered the list of deification, and when the plan of deification was finalized, he would be made the natal celestial lord of some mighty ancient star. With that, he would immediately possess the power of a primordial expert, or even stronger. Therefore, Daoist Qingke reluctantly flew toward the Dalu Ocean, where the list of deification was waiting for him. In the underground spirit cave of East Sea City, Wuxia, who was watching with his divine sense, laughed coldly. He shook his head and said, "Do you think it's that easy?" Daoist Qingke sect leader Xianqing, who is the guardian of the great Emperor Huangzheng Tianwuji sect, go to transmigration now. A beam of white light shot out of his left hand, and Daoist Qingke's name appeared in the Book of Life and Death, including his date of birth, his cultivation process, who was his master, what mystic techniques he had inherited from the Tao League, and so on. All his information appeared in the Book of Life and Death. Silently exercising his energy, Wuxia drew a line at the Book of Life and Death with the soul-hooking brush in his hand. A dark arc of light swept across the book, and at the same time, everyone heard a miserable howl coming out of it. Daoist Qingke's soul, who was flying toward the Dalu Ocean at top speed, exploded abruptly, turning into 10 dim beams of light and falling down from the sky. A 6-colored vortex emerged in midair, and the 6 paths of reincarnation unleashed a terrifying suction force that locked onto Daoist Qingke's soul and swallowed it, sending it directly into the 6 paths of reincarnation. The information related to Daoist Qingke reappeared in the Book of Life and Death. During his 72 eons of cultivation, he had attained the peak of primordial immortal realm, during which he had killed countless people and plundered countless natural energy. His disciples had committed all sorts of crimes, such as bullying men and women, and wiping out entire clans. Because of all the crimes he had committed, he was condemned to be a lone pine tree on Mount Tailing in Penghu Continent's Zhong province. He would have to endure the wind and rain for 30,000 years before he could enter the cycle of reincarnation again. As more and more characters appeared in the Book of Life and Death, the journey of Daoist Qingke's next 1,000 lives was revealed one by one. The 6 paths of reincarnation was derived from the heavenly Tao of Penghu world, and the Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking brush were crafted from the body of the great Saint Penghu. Therefore, the Book of Life and Death had a close connection with the 6 paths of reincarnation. The journey of Daoist Qingke's 1,000 lives was clearly shown in the Book of Life and Death. In 1,000 lives he was just a plant, a bug, and could only become a human again after 1,000 lives. Even so, he was born into a humble family and worked hard all his life without a good ending. Wuxia smiled faintly. The Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking brush transformed into 2 beams of light and flew back into his body. After that, he raised his head and looked in the direction of the Dalu Ocean. If there were no problems with the list of deities, it would be difficult for me to compete with you. But 9 Daozu, why are your artifact crafting skills so poor? There are so many problems in the list of deities, and I can sense them all from here. How can you compete with me now? In the Daoyu Ocean Palace of Dao Origin, the 9 Daozu, who were guarding the list of deities, glanced at each other, dumbfounded. They watched Daoist Qing Ku being thrown into the reincarnation by a mysterious power, and didn't even have the time to save him. What's going on? 9 strong spirit powers drilled into the chaotic world, trying to find out who had thrown Daoist Qing Ku into the reincarnation. But the world was in a mess, so how could they find Wuxia? Chapter 1009. The divine senses of the 9 Daozu tried to search for clues in the chaotic heavenly secrets, but Wuxia added fuel to the fire, and dealt them a heavy blow. Wuqi's divine sense of Dao-fusing realm blasted into the heavenly secrets like a nuclear bomb exploding, completely blowing the heavenly secrets into a mess. The Dao-fusing realm mighty figures used all kinds of mystic arts to muddle the heavenly secrets, and by following some kind of pattern, they could still obtain some information from the heavenly secrets by following the pattern themselves. However, Wuxia was different. He was not good at divination, so he simply used the most brutal method to completely blow up the heavenly secrets. If he relied solely on the heavenly Dao to stabilize the heavenly secrets, it would take at least 2 to 3 eons. The 9 Dao ancestors, whose divine senses were trying to identify all kinds of information in the torrent of heavenly secrets, suffered a great loss. It was like a person was swimming in a flood, and suddenly someone put a bomb beside him. 18 streams of blood flowed down from the 9 Daozu's nostrils. They exchanged a glance, clenched their teeth, and wiped the blood off their noses. Then they focused all their divine senses into the investiture of gods. 18 streams of blood flowed down from the 9 Daozu's nostrils. They exchanged a glance, clenched their teeth, and wiped the blood off their noses. Then they focused all their divine senses into the investiture of gods. They refused to believe that even if the investiture of gods was slightly flawed, they really could not defeat the mighty figure, who was secretly giving them a hard time. They even began to speculate which mighty figure of Dao fusing was giving them a hard time. Could it be that it was the Wahuang clan who had the means and resources to refine such a magic treasure? After messing up the heavenly secrets, Wuxia clapped his hands triumphantly. The purple flame in the heaven-refining cauldron grew stronger, and he immersed his mind in it, cultivating while telling them the endless heavenly secrets. At this moment, not only did he teach the old man Yuanling's understanding of the heavenly Dao in his previous life, but also the essence of the heavenly Dao of great horns, and the other saints to the people of the East Sea. A column of light towered into the sky from the heads of the ministers of the East Sea. Their spirit, energy, and spirit merged perfectly, and their attainments soared under Wuqi's infusion. This was especially true for Princess Zhonglu and Yixia. They did not follow the path of Dao League or Buddhism League, and their cultivation had formed a system of their own. After a million years of painstaking cultivation, both Princess Zhonglu and Yixia had vaguely reached the limit of the Dao-breaking realm, and as long as they found the right path, they would be able to fuse with the Dao. But both of them remembered the agreement between the Wahuang clan and the other Dao-fusing experts, that no Dao-fusing expert should intervene before the tribulation of heaven and earth was over. Neither of them had a calm temperament. How boring would it be if they could only watch from the sidelines when they had the cultivation base of Dao-fusing experts? It would be much more interesting to bully the people of Dao League and Buddhism League with their cultivation base at the peak of the Dao-breaking realm, as well as those fiend gods from outer heavenly realms. Therefore, both of them steadily stabilized their cultivation base in the Dao-breaking realm, and only kept tempering and improving their magic power. Their enormous divine sense fused with the divine sense Wuxia had unleashed, directly extracting the insights of the heavenly Dao from Wuqi's endless memories that were useful to them. They were enshrouded in rosy clouds, and 5-colored divine light and pitch-black demonic flames intertwined, illuminating the entire underground spirit cave. On the battlefield, Han Xian and Xiao He were fleeing in panic. They could not fight against Baiqi alone, let alone a peerless villain like Ao Buzin. Daoist Qingyan was killed by Ao Buzin, and his soul was forced into the transmigration. How could they dare to fight against him? When they returned to Lu Bang's side, Han Xian and Xiao He were shocked to hear that Daoist Qing Yun was completely finished, and that even the sect masters of the 33 heavens could not divine where he had been reincarnated to. It was as if there was an extremely powerful force between heaven and earth that had completely erased all traces of his existence. And even the 9 Daozu could not find any information about him. In other words, Daoist Qing Yun was completely hopeless. In the past, whenever an almighty expert of the Dao League died, even if his soul was sent into the transmigration, there would always be seniors and fellow disciples who would go to the mortal world to help him walk on the path of immortality. But this time, they could not even find where Daoist Qing Yun had been reincarnated to. How could they rescue him from the boundless mortal world? Since then, Lu Bang and the people around him had become extremely afraid of this conferment. According to their original plan, Han Xian, Xiao He, Zhang Liang, and the others would be the predetermined candidates for the conferment of Celestial Lords. But when they realized that they might not be conferred the title of Celestial Lord after their deaths, they immediately had other ideas. If they wanted to die, they should let others do it. It would be enough for them to have an immortal body. After being conferred the title of Celestial Lord, they would immediately become important ministers of the Celestial Court, and from then on, they would be spared from 99% of all tribulations. Except for the apocalypse of heaven and earth, no other tribulations would ever hurt them. But they had to be conferred the title of Celestial Lord. If they were sent into the transmigration like Daoist Qing Yun, who would be willing to take that risk? Not to mention the secret plan of Han Xian, Xiao He and Lu Bang, who had escaped. Ao Buzan knocked out the Jade Dragon Fairy with a punch, then threw her onto the back of the Xiaoyalong. After that, he came to the frozen Baiqi and casually punched the Xianbing into pieces. Baiqi roared furiously and struggled out of the ice. He was about to swing his sword forward, but fortunately, he stopped in time when he saw Ao Buzan's face. He forced a smile and nodded at Xiang Ao, then asked what happened. Ao Buzan stared at Baiqi for a while, then slowly put away the soul-splitting spear. He grinned and said, "Luckily you put away your sword. Otherwise, if you attacked Lao Tzu with your sword, Lao Tzu would surely poke 17 or 18 holes in your body. Old Bai, Lao Tzu helped you drive away Han Xian and Xiao He, and also subdued this fierce woman. You should thank me." The Jade Dragon Fairy lay unconscious on Xiaoyalong's back with her eyes rolled up. Han Xian and Xiao He were nowhere to be found. Beside Ao Buzan floated the dark nether crystal bottle and the green nightmare thunder hammer, 2 chaos spirit treasures. Hearing his words, Baiqi thanked him repeatedly. Shoulder to shoulder, the two returned to the sky above the city. Seeing that Baiqi was back, while Han Xian and Xiao He were nowhere to be found, they used morale sword, while the morale of the Ling dynasty's soldiers dropped to 0. Clanging noises rang out as the soldiers of the Ling dynasty dropped their weapons and knelt on the ground, surrendering. This time, Baiqi did not kill the captives. Instead, he enslaved them and sent them to fight with the army. With the presence of 4 supreme oracles, the souls of over 1 million Ling dynasty soldiers who had surrendered were sealed with restrictive spells. Their lives and deaths were now in the hands of Dayu's generals. Dayu's soldiers were busy cleaning up the battlefield. The city wall raised by Xiao He using immortal magic was smashed to pieces. Large groups of soldiers marched out in formation, and the broken armaments found on the battlefield were reorganized and reorganized. Once again, Baiqi showed no respect to Xiang Ao. After thanking him for his righteous help, he mounted a handsome white horse and was about to lead the army to a military town of the Ling dynasty in the southeast. Stroking his chin, Ao Buzan looked at the white horse that Baiqi was sitting on. Suddenly, he let out a long and loud neigh. The white horse shuddered with fear, and its farts and excrement all over its body. Its 4 legs went limp, and it threw Baiqi and his men to the ground. Baiqi's eyelids twitched with anger. He sprung to his feet and bellowed, "Ao Buzan, even though you've saved my life, how could you humiliate me like this?" Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan glanced at the white horse that had fallen to the ground and twitched. Aye, how could the mighty prince of Wuhan ride such an ordinary mount? An ordinary white horse that can't even be considered as a demon? How could this happen? How could Dayu treat you so cruelly? Baiqi's face turned green, while the Dayu generals standing beside him glared at Ao Buzan. Was it not Ao Buzan's doing? It was one thing for him to unify the dragons and summon all the dragons in the world to the East Sea. That was his freedom. After all, he was Arko Zulong, was he not? But when he took the dragons away, he also abducted all the rare and powerful mounts of the various powers. Not to mention divine beasts and immortal beasts, even some demon beasts with a little bit of power had followed Ao Buzan to the East Sea. In the East Sea, these divine beasts, immortal beasts, and demon beasts could live freely. After all, among Wu Qi's disciples were Tu Xiaobai, Yuan Qing, and a few other demons. They had formed their own lineage in the East Sea, and were on an equal footing with the human race, which was much better than working as slaves in other places. Now, except for Emperor Haozuan and the few sacred emperors, who could gather a few immortal beasts as mounts, Dayu's generals, including Baiqi, could only ride on ordinary white horses. Staring coldly at Ao Buzan, Baiqi gritted his teeth and said, "Don't you know why?" Ao Buzan nodded thoughtfully. He summoned the little dragon hovering in midair, patted Xiaoyalong on the buttocks, and said with a smile, "What do you think of this little fellow, King of Wuan? The cultivation base of a true dragon is equal to that of a gold immortal, and it has the divine ability to travel through the void. I think it is a good candidate for a combat partner. Don't you think? Not a mount, but a combat partner." Baiqi looked thoughtfully at Ao Buzan and asked, "What price do you want?" Ao Buzan laughed triumphantly. Patting Xiaoyalong on the buttocks, Ao Buzan said, "I can't force those divine beasts and immortal beasts to seek refuge in the East Sea, but as for the descendants of the dragons, Lao Tzu can't feed them for nothing, can he? They have to work for Lao Tzu. A combat partner of the true dragon level costs 100 supreme-grade immortal stones a day, and a combat partner of the heavenly dragon level costs 100 superior-grade immortal stones a day. If you insist on having a combat partner of the divine dragon level, the immortal stones are not enough." Baiqi stared blankly at Ao Buzan. This shameless, filthy scum has united the dragons and abducted the powerful mounts of all the powers. Is this what he came up with? Monopolizing the resources, and then selling them to make money? But how useful could a powerful mount be on the battlefield? Baiqi did not even bother to bargain with Ao Buzan. After all, the treasury of Dayu was backing him up, and Baiqi did not need to pay for it himself. And to be honest, Baiqi had no concept of money. When had he ever been short of money? Immediately, Baiqi and Ao Buzan signed the first Dragon's Employment Agreement in Panga World. Baiqi hired 300 divine dragons as strong as primordial immortals, 100,000 true dragons as strong as gold immortals, and 1 million heavenly dragons as strong as heaven immortals to join his army. The agreement would be valid for 100 years. This agreement immediately made Li Si, Su Qin, Zhang Yi, and the others, who were responsible for coordinating the expenditure of Dayu's army, vomit blood. After that, they gritted their teeth, pulled out their swords, and chased Baiqi for tens of thousands of miles. Because of this agreement, Ao Buzan became the richest man in the East Sea under Wu Qi's command. Every day, countless of his descendants worked hard for the sake of Ao Buzan's wallet. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League reacted immediately. They secretly sent envoys to contact Ao Buzan. The second and third employment agreements of the dragons were immediately produced. Chapter 10:10. In the southwest border of Dayu, above a magnificent military town, a golden dragon was carrying a general of the Shizo dynasty on his back, and another golden dragon was carrying a general of Dayu, facing each other in midair. Both golden dragons had the cultivation base of peak-level true dragons, while the general of the Shizo dynasty was cultivating the indestructible body technique of the Buddhist League. His cultivation base had reached the realm of Bodhisattva, and he was strong enough to fight against a peak-level gold immortal. The general of Dayu, on the other hand, was slightly weaker. His body-tempering technique of the human race had reached the level of the 9 stars of the second Panga heaven, and he was still one step away from the peak. The second golden dragon swayed his head and wagged his tail as he leaped forward. His huge body covered the body of the general of Shizo dynasty, so that the tens of thousands of soldiers behind him could not see what was happening here. Many years later, some Shizo dynasty soldiers would still argue about what happened here on this day. The general of Ling dynasty was stunned. He looked blankly back in the direction of the city of Wanling, wondering what was written in the agreement to hire the dragons to fight. However, the elder dragons remained in a daze in midair for a long time. After a long while, he suddenly yawned and pretended to throw down the torpedo. Just as the general of Ling dynasty was waiting to enjoy the beautiful scene of the city being breached, a dragon roar suddenly came from a distance. Thousands of giant dragons came riding clouds and plunged into the city of Diyu below. While the two brothers were chattering, the general of the Jin dynasty could no longer hold back his anger. Suddenly, he leaped into the air and swung a shovel at the general of Great Yu, who was standing opposite him. He scolded sternly. "What are you still talking about? Kill them all." The golden dragon under which the general of Dayu was sitting sneezed. He nodded and said, "Is that so? Mother, the two dragon eggs from 300 years ago have hatched?" "Ugh, I don't remember. When I'm off, I'll find some time to go back and take a look." "TSK, second bro. Although we're hired to be your mounts, you still have to choose a good companion. If you get a monk to sit on you, you'll lose everything sooner or later." But things were just so strange. It seemed like everyone was reaping victory after victory on the battlefield. But after several years of hard work, when the three sides calculated the final results, the gains and losses were about the same, and no one gained anything. The general of Diyu was silent. Until one day, Lu Buwei of the Ling dynasty and a prime minister of the Shizo dynasty came to visit him at the same time. The general of the Ling dynasty stared blankly at the treacherous old dragon in front of him, then stammered, But you are helping us fight. If you leave those dragons." Aobuzan successfully sold millions of dragons to Diyu to join the Diyu army, and the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League also offered a huge sum of money to hire the dragons to join the war. In particular, the Buddhist League became the biggest spendthrift. They spent an astronomical amount of money to hire the members of the Dragon Tribe, one of the original members of the Buddhist Celestial 8 divisions, back to the Buddhist League, and spent a huge amount of immortal stones every day to hire them to help them fight. Without the control of these dragons, the monstrous waves that soaked the whole city quickly dispersed, and the dark clouds in the sky retracted, and the bright sun shone down. Below, the cheers of countless Diyu soldiers could be heard coming from the city of Diyu, and the sonorous roars of the dragons could be heard. With the addition of the dragons, the generals and soldiers of Diyu, the Shizo dynasty, and the Ling dynasty had a powerful combat partner. To put it bluntly, they had qualified mounts. But the addition of the dragons also gave the commanders of the three parties a headache. With the Arko Zulong, Aobuzan, in charge, no one dared to kill the members of the dragons as they had done in the past. Instead, they had to worship them like their ancestors. A few generals of the Ling dynasty fixed their eyes on the water bomb in the hand of the dragons, wishing they could rush up and snatch it from him, which was powerful enough to blow up ordinary primordial experts and completely destroy the city of Diyu below. Since the dragons joined the war between the three parties had suddenly become very strange. It was as if the whole war had been stuck with glue. Although cities were being captured every day, overall, the progress of the three parties was about the same, and no one had really gained the upper hand. The elder of the dragons threw his head back and yawned, rubbed the water bomb in his hand, sealed it, and shoved it into his sleeve. Then he whistled and turned to leave. Thousands of dragons who were stirring up trouble yawned lazily, twisted their huge bodies, and transformed into strong men. Laughing and laughing, they put their arms around each other's shoulders and rode on clouds, retreating with the elder of the dragons toward the military camp of the Ling dynasty in the distance. Wuxia was very pleased with himself. The war on Pangu continent was unfolding according to his will, and no one could end the war quickly. Somewhere on the coast of the inland sea on Pangu continent, a magnificent city of Diyu was swaying in the raging storm. Perhaps because of Aobuzan's influence, the dragons were degenerating day after day. They were even more despicable, and shameless than the hooligans in the market. 90% of the violations of military discipline in the army were committed by them. Audiobook was laughing so hard that his teeth almost fell off. His children were making him a huge fortune every day, and he had never been so rich. The dragons fought bravely, and many of the generals of the three parties were seriously wounded or killed by them. Their powerful innate divine abilities had also helped the three armies capture many of the enemy's cities. Some members of the dragons had even suddenly become excellent strategists. Under their guidance, the armies of the three parties had accurately found the flaws of the enemy during the march and wiped out a large number of the enemy's armies. A miserable howl rang out. The head of the Shizo general was cut off by the sword of the Du general, and his body was riddled with 25 transparent holes by dragon claws. Yes, 25 transparent holes. When the body of the Shizo general fell to the ground, many Shizo soldiers saw clearly that there were indeed 25 transparent dragon claw marks on his body. But it was obvious that the golden dragon had only attacked him once. Why were there so many wounds? The general of the Shizo dynasty was silent. The elder of the dragons looked at the general of the Ling dynasty with a serious face and said, "Cut the crap." In short, everything will be done according to the terms of the employment agreement signed by the dragons. We, the dragons, are the most trustworthy people, and we will never go back on our word. As long as there are members of the dragons in the city, we will never strike again. Of course, because of our existence, they will never strike again. That's all. After a full quarter of an hour, the eldest brother of the golden dragon suddenly came to his senses and said, "Second brother, cut the crap. Aren't we at war now?" The two golden dragons and the generals of the two countries were separated by a distance of 3 to 5 li suddenly. The golden dragon that the general of the Shizo dynasty was sitting on raised his right front claw and greeted the golden dragon opposite him. "Big brother, mother sent a message. Don't gamble away all your pay this month. Leave some for home. Mother has just given us 2 younger brothers, and we need some money to buy some good elixirs for them to lay a foundation for." The eldest brother of the golden dragon drooled as he laughed. "Our ancestor taught us that there is nothing more satisfying than finding a beautiful woman to bear children with. TSK, the most beautiful woman in the world belongs to our king of East Sea. The second most beautiful woman belongs to our ancestor. As for the other beauties, they will be taken by the good men of the dragons. TSK, second brother, I hooked up with one in the city the day before yesterday." The second brother of the golden dragon was stunned for a long while. He waved his tail and turned to look at the general of the Shizo dynasty who was standing on his back with a stiff face and a green face. He laughed and said, "Why don't we retreat and return to camp today? It's a rare chance to meet Big Brother. This is a good day. For the sake of us brothers, we might as well bury the hatchet. TSK, instead of drawing our swords and creating a river of blood, why don't we go to the nearby village and find a few beauties and have some fun?" Thousands of giant dragons hovered in the air, stirring up more than half of the inner sea, turning it into a powerful waterfall that fell from the sky and fiercely washed over the city's defenses. The huge city was almost soaked in water. The soldiers in the city stared blankly at the dark sky where countless giant dragons could be vaguely seen. They had the illusion that they were suffocating. The elder of the dragons widened his eyes. He pointed his wooden staff at the city of Du and shouted, "How can we do that? The contract signed between the Ling dynasty and us dragons of the East Sea clearly states that we, the dragons, will never kill each other. Well, the other side also has dragons as reinforcements, so we can't do anything. In any case, we've already destroyed more than half of their defenses. Can't you deal with the remaining half?" A jet of dragon flame shot out and burned the corpse of the Shizo dynasty general to ashes. A black and white light flashed in the void, and the soul of the Shizo dynasty general was forcibly sent into the cycle of reincarnation. So no one knew what had happened. Across the entire Pangu continent, only Wuxia and Audiobook were laughing. In short, as soon as the second golden dragon moved, the eldest golden dragon and the general of Du moved at the same time. Thousands of giant dragons returned to the barracks in high spirits. Immediately, they slapped the tables and smashed the tents, demanding the army cooks of the Ling dynasty to serve them good wine and meat as soon as possible. If they were a little slow, they would immediately throw a punch at the Ling Dynasty soldiers, causing them to scream and have all their teeth knocked out. The tens of thousands of soldiers behind the two generals fell silent. They stared blankly at the two Golden Dragon brothers, who were chatting with each other, and felt that something was not right. The tense atmosphere suddenly became extremely strange. The two Golden Dragon brothers kept talking and drooling, and when they got excited, they let the woods down below enjoy a downpour of dragon saliva. In the coming year, the vegetation here would grow much better, and many spirit herbs would grow here. An elder of the dragons was hovering in midair. He looked a little old, with a wooden staff in his hand and a black torpedo the size of a water tank in his right hand. The torpedo was condensed with 30% of the water from the inland ocean, which was hundreds of millions of miles in circumference, and possessed a terrible lethality. If he were to throw it down, the defense of Du City down below would be doomed. The general of the Ling Dynasty, who was supervising the battle, hurriedly stood in front of the elder of the dragons and cried out, "Why don't you continue to attack the city?" Behind the army of dragons, who were wreaking havoc, countless soldiers of the Ling Dynasty were lined up in a phalanx above the dark clouds, filled with a strong will to fight, roaring loudly from time to time. All the soldiers of the Ling Dynasty knew that the Spirit Emperor, Zhang Tingyun, had hired millions of dragons to fight for the Ling Dynasty at a sky-high price. At first, over 90% of the soldiers of the Ling Dynasty could not understand why these long worms were worth such a high price. But today, when they saw the terrible means that could almost drown the heaven and the earth, they realized that it was really worth it. The battle was stuck in a strange stalemate, and no one could change the course of the battle. Chapter 10-11. At Wuxi's behest, the dragons joined the war. They were either pestering the enemy, spying as spies, defecting at the last moment, or assassinating. In short, they made the war a mess. No one could defeat the other, and everyone was wasting their efforts in vain. Du, the Ling Dynasty, and the Shizhou Dynasty were fighting fiercely, while the East Sea and Great Wu were developing with all their might. Another 2 years passed, and more than 2 million years had passed in the underground spirit cave shrouded by Dark Yi's celestial tower. Inside Wuqi's heaven-refining cauldron, a terrible, despairing killing intent burst out. The newborn Xianyuan sword slowly flew out of the cauldron along with a thin beam of cold light. Thousands of treasures of the humankind had been rotating around the sword like a nebula, showing the supreme status of the humankind as the greatest treasure of the humankind. The newborn Xianyuan sword was dim and lusterless, with only a very thin gleam flashing on its edge from time to time. The gleam was so sharp that except for Wuqi, who was the one who crafted it, no one, including Wuxia, whose cultivation base had recovered to its peak, could look at it directly. Some of the immortals under Wuqi's tutelage even accidentally glanced at it, and their eyes were injured by the sword intent, almost blinded by it. With a flick of his sleeve, Wuqi put all the artifacts of virtue into his left sleeve, then placed the heaven-refining cauldron in the spirit cave. With the help of the endless natural energy, he turned it into a raging flame to nourish the other tens of thousands of strangely shaped magical artifacts in the cauldron. 2 years ago in the outside world, he had already refined these merit weapons. However, he deliberately slowed down and spent a lot of time refining these 10,000 magic treasures. Now Wuqi had no shortage of materials. After coming into contact with thousands of artifacts of virtue day and night in the heaven-refining cauldron, the artifacts had more or less been contaminated with some of their mysterious power. As a result, the newborn magical artifacts now had the vicissitudes of time, making them look even more powerful. But they were, after all, newly crafted and still lacked some foundation, which made Wuqi a little dissatisfied. At best, they could be regarded as top-notch primordial artifacts, and they were still a step away from being innate spirit artifacts, let alone supreme treasures of primal and chaotic spirit treasures. Among the almighty experts of the Tao League, just the 2 junior sect masters of Grand Emperor Huangzhengtian had 2 chaotic spirit treasures, the Dark Nether Crystal Bottle and the Dark Thunder Hammer. So, Wuqi was not in the mood to distribute these newly crafted artifacts to his disciples and subjects of the East Sea. After giving a few words of advice to Princess Zhonglu and Wuxia, Wuqi clasped his hands behind his back and walked step by step into the sky. With each step, he traveled 1,000,000,000 miles, and in the blink of an eye, he had arrived outside the Empress Hua Palace in the human realm upon heaven. Looking at the Empress Hua Palace in the boundless purple mist, Wuqi's eyes shone brightly. The resources of the Tao League and the Buddhist League were too profound. Since the beginning of time, almost all the treasures once owned by those fallen chaos fiend gods in Pangu world had fallen into their hands. Therefore, if he wanted to fight against the countless treasures of the Tao League and the Buddhist League, he could only use the artifacts of virtue. The artifacts of virtue of the human race responded to the heavenly Tao, the geography, and the human heart. They were the ultimate treasures of heaven, earth, and man. As long as there was an enormous amount of virtue to purify the artifacts just crafted by Wuqi, and let them absorb enough power of virtue, they would be smoothly transformed into artifacts of virtue. Even when fighting against chaos spirit treasures, the artifacts of virtue would not fall into a disadvantage. The only thing he had to worry about was the supreme treasures of primordial. But how many supreme treasures of primordial did the Tao League and the Buddhist League have? Without the help of Tao fusing experts, if the disciples of the Tao League and the Buddhist League used the supreme treasures of primordial, wouldn't they be sending themselves to Wuqi's death? After pondering for a while, Wuqi walked step by step to the gate of the Empress Hua Palace. Layers of auspicious mist and dazzling light filled the air, and a fragrant breeze blew over. A golden beam stretched out from the Empress Hua Palace and spread out before Wuqi like a carpet. Surrounded by thousands of maidservants, the Huahuang clan slowly walked out of the palace with a guard of honor. From a long distance, the Huahuang clan smiled and said, "Yuan Ling, my old friend, you came 2 years later than I expected." Wuqi blushed a little. He could not tell the Huahuang clan that he was using the aura of those artifacts of virtue to temper his family's magical treasures. Could he? With a flick of his sleeve, the Xianyuan sword flew out along with several thousand newly born artifacts of virtue. An enormous wave of energy swept across the entire space beyond the heavens, especially the terrifying sharp energy released by the Xianyuan sword, which tore apart the purple energy barrier between the heavens and the outside world, almost poking a large hole in the heavens. The Huahuang clan glanced at the artifacts of virtue in surprise, which were at least twice as powerful as before. With a smile, she nodded at Wuqi and said, "Yuan Ling, my old friend, the art of artifact refinement is indeed the best in the world. With these artifacts, the human race will no longer have to fear the schemes of the Tao League and the Buddhist League." Narrowing her eyes and smiling, the Huahuang clan said meaningfully, "Not to mention, Audiobook is here to help us." Wuqi laughed mischievously. He knew that his little scheme had been seen through by the Huahuang clan. The dragon's little tricks might be able to fool others, but they could never fool these almighty experts of the Tao-fusing realm. However, this was the most powerful point of Wuqi's scheme. Even if the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs knew that the dragons were playing tricks behind their backs, they could not afford to not hire the dragons. If they did not hire the dragons, all the dragons would rush to help Diyu fight the war, and the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty would lose even more miserably, forcing them to spend a huge amount of money to hire the unreliable dragons to help them fight the war. Wuqi and Aobuzan's scheme was extremely powerful, and at the same time, extremely disgusting. If the Huahuang clan did not take this matter seriously, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs would probably be vomiting blood and anger by now. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. The Huahuang clan gladly put away the thousands of weapons of merit that had greatly improved their power, and smilingly invited Wuqi into the palace to serve them tea. In a beautiful place in Emperor Nvua's palace, a small pavilion stood on top of a high peak. The water was bright and beautiful, and the mountains were elegant. A few young palace maids were carefully cooking the supreme-grade spiritual tea that the Huahuang clan had extorted from Wuqi. The aroma of the tea drifted thousands of miles away. Wuqi sat in front of the Huahuang clan with his legs crossed. Before the Huahuang clan could say anything, he waved his hand, and a water screen flew out from a waterfall beside the pavilion, showing the image of a battlefield. Pointing at the water screen, Wuqi said smilingly, "Empress Hua, Yuan Ling, There is one thing that I don't understand. The Taoist League and Buddhist League have been fighting against these fiend gods for years, killing countless fiend gods. Why didn't they get any natural virtues? In the water screen was a grass-green planet, floating in the void. 70% of this vast planet was a boundless grassland. At the moment, thousands of immortals in Taoist robes were fighting a bloody battle with tens of thousands of foreign fiend celestials. The cultivation base of the immortals in Taoist robes was clearly superior to the foreign fiend celestials. Sword beams rained down, killing the wounded foreign fiend celestials in a frenzy. After signing an agreement with the Wuxia clan that Tao fusing experts were not allowed to join the battle, Taoist League and Buddhist League immediately organized their elite forces to launch a counterattack against the fiend gods. They wiped out those fiend gods one by one, and at the same time, rescued the disciples of Taoist League and Buddhist League who were trapped in their mountains. After 2 to 3 years, these immortals who launched a counterattack against the fiend gods had achieved a glorious result. But as Wuxia said, these immortals did not get any natural virtues after killing those fiend gods. It was the same for the images displayed on the screen of light. A gold immortal had unleashed a golden bright brick to smash a 4-headed, 8-armed fiend deity. And yet there was no reaction from the void at all. Not a single bit of merit fell. The Wuxia clan laughed. She looked at Wuxia and nodded, saying, "My old friend Yuan Ling, do you need a huge amount of natural virtues to refine a treasure?" Wuxia narrowed his eyes and said, "Sure enough, I can't hide it from Empress Hua. But I can't help it. My foundation is weak, and many of my disciples are still using magic and spirit artifacts. Yuan Ling has some Tao reasoning disciples, but they are still using heaven immortal artifacts. If they go out and fight with the Buddhist League and Taoist League, they will lose all their face, not to mention the result." The Wuxia clan shook her head and smiled. She pointed a finger out, and a plume of purple mist sprayed out from the top of her head. The myriad spirit cauldron was faintly visible in the mist, releasing a mysterious and immeasurable aura. Wuxia vaguely sensed that this aura was related to the entire Pangu world, and even affected the trend of the great Tao of Pangu world to some extent. This was the first time the cauldron released such an aura in front of anyone. Wuxia exclaimed in shock. This cauldron is not only the source of souls of all living beings in Pangu world. Is it? It. The Wuxia clan sighed slightly, then nodded and said, "My old friend, Yuan Ling is right. This cauldron not only contains over 90% of the great Saint Panga's life force and spirit power, it also contains over 90% of his consciousness, Yuan Ling. He created Pangu world with his own body, and this cauldron is the original spirit treasure of Pangu world. With this cauldron, Goddess Nuwa was able to affect the trend of the great Tao of Pangu world." Wuxia stared at the Wuxia clan in a daze. Wuxia clan reached the level of Tao fusing with natural rewards power, and was the weakest among all Tao fusing beings, but she was actually the controller of the great Tao of Pangu world. Perhaps her influence on the great Tao of Pangu world was very weak, but over time, no matter how weak her influence was, it would gather into a powerful torrent and crush the powers of Tao League and Buddhism, just like the invasion of the fiend gods from outer space. Twisting his mouth corners, Wuxia sneered, "Those old bastards, they are really innocent. Don't they know what the cauldron is?" Wuxia clan raised her eyebrows and said with a sly smile, "Goddess Nuwa is just a weak woman, and the offensive power of this cauldron is only equal to that of an ordinary innate spirit artifact. Apart from that, it can only absorb the primordial energy and transform it into the power of the souls of living beings. What they like are powerful spirit treasures that can destroy the world. Why would they take a fancy to this cauldron?" Wuxia had a secret talk with Wuxia clan for 4 hours in Empress Hua Palace. After that, he returned to the East Sea with a smile on his face, bringing Princess Zhonglu, Xia, and a group of his disciples to a certain place in the outer space. When they arrived, Wuxia activated the heaven refining cauldron as the core of the formation, and shot out 490,000 Kunwu swords to form the fiend-slaying sword formation. Then, with a deafening rumble, the magnificent power of time and space of the Mirror of Kunlun broke open a portal hundreds of thousands of miles in diameter in the void, from which came countless grotesque fiend gods, squeaking and squeaking. Ready, Wuxia unleashed a bolt of lightning, and the sword energy of the fiend-slaying sword formation swept across the void. These fiend gods, whose cultivation bases were no higher than peak-level gold immortals, howled miserably as they were torn to pieces. Every time a fiend god was killed, a purple cloud would descend from the void, and a great amount of virtues would be absorbed by the heaven-refining cauldron. Whether or not the virtues would descend after killing a fiend god was all under the control of the Wahuang clan. He had also killed a fiend god, but he had gained immeasurable merits, while the Buddhist League and Tao League had gained nothing. Chapter 10-12. While Wuxia was tempering his magical treasures with the help of the boundless virtues, Ao Buzin was entertaining guests in his Zulong Palace. The vast East Sea was now filled with the figures of giant dragons twisting and turning. As for the other fish, shrimps, crabs, and other monsters, except for some who were left behind as rations for the dragon clan, had all migrated to other waters. As for the exact number of dragons gathered in the East Sea, even the great elders of the dragons, who had the highest status among the dragons, had no idea. In any case, not to mention the dragons who came from other powers to join them, just the dragon clan, one of the 8 divisions of the Buddhist celestial 8 divisions, had a population of 1 billion, and the number of their offspring was even more astonishing. The East Sea, which was occupied by the members of the dragon clan, was filled with a monstrous dragon chi. The vast East Sea was covered with water clouds of all colors, and from time to time, there would be violent storms, hailstorms, and hurricanes. On a small island in the middle of the East Sea, an unprecedentedly magnificent palace occupied the entire island, which measured about 100 miles in both width and length. This was the Zulong Palace. The huge palace was wrapped in a colorful glow, illuminating the entire East Sea. This part of the palace on the island was only a small part of the Zulong Palace. In the depths of the sea next to the island, a large number of palaces were still being built. It was estimated that the completed Zulong Palace would cover an area of 10,000 miles in circumference. Just the part of the palace that was exposed to the public was already extraordinarily magnificent. Every brick and tile on the palace gave off the air of a nouveau riche, and every brick and tile seemed to be roaring madly at the people. "I am a rich man, and you are all poor, poor, poor." Not even a blade of grass could be seen in the huge palace. All the flowers, plants, and trees were carved with supreme-grade immortal stones and other precious crystals of various colors. Precious crystals such as jade essence, chalcedony, dark heavenly flame crystal, green water crystal, and greenwood crystal, which were worth tens of thousands of yuan, were carved into all kinds of exotic flowers and grasses, decorating the gardens. As for the base of the palace, it was a whole piece of Vajra fritillary, which had been refined by a Zen technique of the Buddhist League for dozens of eons. It was crafted by several ancient Buddhas of the Buddhist League with all their efforts. Originally, it was intended to add an extraordinary treasure to the Buddhist League, the Vairocana wheel of fiend slaying, and this wheel-shaped Vajra fritillary was the base of that wheel. However, in order to hire the 8 tribes of the East Sea to return to the Shizo dynasty, Buzin, Vajra of this valuable Vajra fritillary, had extorted him with it, and used it to build his palace. The rare materials that several ancient Buddhas with the strength equivalent to the realm of Tao breaking had spent dozens of eons to refine and purify were used as floor tiles. Anyone who saw the ancestral dragon palace with their own eyes would only be angry at Ao Buzin's extravagance. But now he had the wealth to waste, and no one could blame him for his mistake. Every day, the Buddhist League alone had to pay Ao Buzin billions of supreme-grade immortal stones and countless other precious treasures for the members of the dragons they hired. So, what did it matter to Ao Buzin to waste some materials to build his palace? On the small island, in the group of palaces on the west side of the Zulong Palace, there was a pearl luminescence pavilion that caught everyone's attention. It was built with transparent luminous pearls, ranging from the size of a human head to the size of a fist. The pavilion was exquisitely designed, and was built with tens of millions of precious luminous pearls. The interior of the pavilion was as bright as day, and its walls, floor, and ceiling were emitting a dazzling light. No one or anything would be able to cast a shadow in this place, And it also had the miraculous effect of breaking all kinds of escape arts and invisibility spells. Lu Buwei was sitting in the pearl luminescence pavilion, his eyelids drooping as he waited for Ao Buzin to show up. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Lu Buwei had waited for 7 days and 7 nights. Finally, Ao Buzin, yawning and his clothes disheveled, leaped lazily out of a rolling dark water, then sat down next to Lu Buwei. Before Lu Buwei could say anything, Ao Buzin had already slapped heavily on Lu Buwei's shoulder and said, "Old Lu, I have an impression of you. You are a shrewd man, but I have 3 rules for you." Raising one finger, Ao Buzin said with a stern voice, "If you dare to ask Lao Tzu to lower the price, Lao Tzu will eat you." Raising the second finger, Ao Buzin grinned coldly and said, "If you dare to say that Lao Tzu's children are not good at fighting, Lao Tzu will eat you." Raising the third finger, Old Buzin yawned and sprayed a foul dragon breath at Lu Buwei, then said lazily, "In short, if you want to earn any benefits from Lao Tzu, don't say it, because Lao Tzu will wash you and eat you slowly. Everyone says that you are very clever, but Lao Tzu has overused his brain recently, so he needs to eat the brains of a clever man to nourish his brain." Currently, Lu Buwei only had the cultivation base of a lower-tier gold immortal, and Ao Buzin's claw had nearly smashed him to pieces. He gave a wry smile and said carefully, "You are right, Zulong. I have a great benefit to tell Zulong on this trip." With a wry smile on his face, Lu Buwei's heart was filled with bitterness. This Ao Buzin is completely unreasonable. Originally, the higher-ups of the Ling dynasty had heard about the various strange things the dragons did in their battles. Therefore, they had sent Lu Buwei to reason with Ao Buzin. After all, they could not let the dragons take all the benefits, while he was still dragging them down from behind, could they? However, Ao Buzin had come straight to the point and blocked Lu Buwei's excuse. What else could he say? A great benefit? Ao Buzin's eyes lit up. Is Zhang Tingyan going to give me all his women? TSK, although Lao Tzu would rather have a peach than a basket of rotten apricots. All of Zhang Tingyan's women are more or less empresses or imperial concubines, and Lao Tzu is quite interested in playing with them. Lu Buwei's eyes turned green with anger. "That's not what I want either," he said through clenched teeth. Afraid that Ao Buzin would say something disrespectful, Lu Buwei said in a low voice, "May I ask where the king of East Sea is?" Ao Buzin looked at Lu Buwei suspiciously. "I can't tell you this. My master's actions are the biggest secret of the East Sea. If he tells you that he is meeting with the Buddhist emissaries." Lao Tzu did not say anything. "Moreover, the way you address him is wrong. You should address him as Yen Huang Heavenly Emperor. After all, the East Sea has established the Yen Huang Emperor. My master is also the emperor." Lu Buwei shuddered all over. He exclaimed, "He is meeting with the Buddhist emissaries." Ao Buzin's eyes darted around. He looked at Lu Buwei, who had an uncertain expression on his face, and said with a smile, "This Lao Tzu is not sure either. Old Lu, did you go to the King of East Sea's residence and not get to meet my master? That is only natural. To tell you the truth, even the Buddhist emissaries had to give Lao Tzu enough benefits before they could meet my master." Lu Buwei's expression changed again. He laughed in a low voice and said, "May I ask how much benefits that bald donkey gave Zulong?" Ao Buzin reached into his sleeve, and a 1-foot-thick gift list appeared in his hand. He smiled and stuffed the gift list into Lu Buwei's hands. He said proudly, "This is the door package they gave to Lao Tzu. Without enough door packages, I will not let you meet my master." After laughing maniacally 3 times, Ao Buzin turned into a black wave and disappeared without a trace. Lu Buwei trembled as he flipped open the first page of the gift list. His body trembled, and he almost fainted. He hurriedly flipped through the gift list, and could not help but roar, "Shameless bald donkey, how dare he bribe Ao Buzin with such lavish gifts? Isn't this going to empty the Ling dynasty's coffers? And we even need the celestial court to give us some rare treasures to satisfy this damned loach's appetite?" While Lu Buwei was in a daze in the Pearl Luster Pavilion, Ao Buzin had already turned into a wave of water and dashed into a smoke jade pavilion located in the eastern side of the rear hall. Compared to the Pearl Luster Pavilion, The entire smoke jade pavilion was constructed using the finest jade. The jade aura rose into the air, and when the sunlight shone down, it emitted a colorful glow. If one were to stay here for a long time, it would have the effect of prolonging one's life and whitening one's skin. A man with his hair tied up in a bun and wearing a white monk's robe was sitting in the smoke jade pavilion. When he saw Aobuzin, he hurriedly rose to his feet, put his palms together and said, "Senior Torch Dragon, I have finally met you." Aobuzin swaggered into the main seat and said coolly, "Little bald donkey." No, Prime Minister. What brings you here from afar?" These few days, Lao Tzu has been busy having children with his wives and concubines, so he did not have the time to meet with Prime Minister. "Sorry to have kept you waiting." The man in the monk's robe was stunned for a while. Luckily, he was the Prime Minister of the Shizo dynasty. What strange things had he not dealt with before? With a smile on his face, he nodded disrespectfully to Xiang Ao and said, "Bearing children and reproducing is an important matter of human relations. This little monk's matter is not urgent, not urgent." Aobuzin nodded his head in satisfaction. He looked at the man in the monk's robe and laughed coldly. "If you have something to say, just say it. Do you wish to meet Lao Tzu's master? The previous king of East Sea, and the current emperor of Yanhuang?" The man in the monk's robe laughed. "Senior Zulong is indeed wise. Nothing can be hidden from you." After a moment of silence, the man in the monk's robe nodded and said with a smile, "Senior, to be honest, the Buddhist sect intends to recruit Yanhuang. As long as Yanhuang is willing to join the Shizo dynasty, Yanhuang can name any conditions." Aobuzin rolled his eyes. He laughed and said, "This matter is of great importance. Lao Tzu cannot make the decision. You have to meet Lao Tzu's master and talk to him face to face. However, I might as well tell you that without Lao Tzu's help, you will not be able to meet him. Otherwise, if you are an assassin, won't you be in danger?" Aobuzin reached into his sleeve and fumbled for a while. A 1-foot gift list, exactly the same as the one given to Lu Buwei, flew out. Aobuzin threw the gift list into the arms of the man in the monk's robe and said with a laugh, "This is a bribe given to Lao Tzu by Lu Buwei of the Ling dynasty. Lao Tzu has promised to arrange for him to meet our master in a few days." Can you meet my master?" This question, ha ha ha. Aobuzin laughed and turned into a black wave that burrowed into the ground. The man in the monk's robe opened the gift list curiously and glanced at it. His body suddenly twitched and he burst out cursing. "Damn it, the Ling dynasty has also set their eyes on the unified dragons. What should we do?" Chapter 10:13. In the boundless void, Wuxia waved his hand casually. A Kunwu sword streaked across 1,000 miles in an arc of light, cutting dozens of 10,000 feet tall fiend gods in half within 1,000 miles of him. Virtues fell like rain as the heaven-refining cauldron devoured them. Tens of thousands of magical artifacts were frantically devouring the power of virtues, and several of them with the strongest devouring power were already covered with a faint layer of purple mist. "That's not enough," Wuxia sniffled. "It would take a lot of virtues to transform tens of thousands of magical artifacts into artifacts of virtue. After all, each artifact of virtue was formed by the power of a dynasty, the faith and faith of dozens of generations of people, and countless virtues. Even with the means of the Wahuang clan, she could only produce a few thousand artifacts of virtue, and that was what she had accumulated after countless years of planning and planning. To refine more than 10,000 Dharma treasures in one go, how many outer realm fiend celestials would he have to kill to turn all of them into merit artifacts?" Yawning, Wuxia waved both hands. Thousands of Kunwu swords turned into beams of light that whistled back and forth. Inside the fiend-slaying sword formation that measured hundreds of thousands of miles in diameter, tens of thousands of excited fiend gods were cut to pieces while howling miserably. Wuxia darted back and forth in the sword formation in a beam of colorful light. Wherever she passed, all the fiend gods shrieked and turned into dried corpses. Then their shriveled bodies turned into fine powder that drifted away in the wind. All their spirit, energy, and soul were plundered by Wuxia. Wuxia's shrill laughter almost tore the void, and the heads of all the fiend gods who heard her laughter exploded. Princess Zhongli hovered in midair, surrounded by thick thunderclouds that blanketed the entire sword formation. Lightning bolts fell like rain, bombarding everything in the sword formation indiscriminately. The crimson lightning bolts tore through the bodies of the fiend gods like blades, burrowed into them, and exploded. An alien fiend celestial's body was blown to smithereens as his flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Any fiend celestial that was touched by his flesh and blood let out heart-wrenching screams. Their bodies felt like they had been soaked in sulfuric acid as they rapidly rotted, turning into stinking pus. Under the joint efforts of Wuxia and the other two, no matter how many demon gods rushed out of the huge spatial door, they were all killed. However, the ferocious fiend celestials did not care about the deaths of their own clansmen. They continued to charge forward majestically. However, as Wuqi's team of 3 became more well-coordinated, the number of demon gods that charged out could no longer keep up with the speed at which they were killing. He casually pointed a finger at the void, and a wave of energy spread across the entire heavenly ghost realm. Prince Chongqing, Wuqi said softly. With a loud buzzing sound, the portal in the void expanded to a diameter of 200,000 miles, and the number of fiend celestials rushing out of it suddenly increased by more than 100 times. Wuqi laughed joyfully. Tens of thousands of sword beams transformed into green beams that stretched over 10,000 miles long and swept across the sky, ripping bones and flesh wherever they passed. Xia and Princess Zhongli had exercised their unique mystic arts to slaughter these demon gods. Virtues kept falling from the sky. While he was slaughtering, Wuqi suddenly paused. The divine sense he left in the East Sea had discovered Ao Buzan's extortion of the emissaries of the Ling dynasty and Shizhou dynasty in Pearl Brilliance Pavilion and Smoke Jade Pavilion. He shook his head and smiled bitterly, then murmured under his breath, "Fine, I'll let you do whatever you want. In any case, I'm just stalling for time. Once these items of virtue are fully completed, the Buddhist League and Tao League will not be able to do anything to us." Even as he was pondering, Wuqi's body suddenly trembled. The divine sense he left in the distance just now had discovered a few familiar figures flying past at high speed. If not for the peerless aura-concealing technique of Scroll of Stealing, they would have long discovered Wuqi's existence. Fortunately, they seemed to be in a hurry, and did not have the time to release their divine sense to check the surroundings. Otherwise, they would have long discovered what Wuqi and his companions were doing. After all, 4 of the 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League had joined hands, and they were accompanied by many important figures of the Buddhist League. This was not a trivial matter. However, Vulture Mountain was still under the control of those fiend celestials, and because of the agreement, the 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League could not personally eradicate those fiend celestials. The disciples of the Buddhist League were fighting those fiend celestials at the risk of their lives, trying to recover the lost land. Now was the time when the patriarchs of the Buddhist League were needed to keep the hearts of the people at bay. How could they come out so easily? After pondering for a moment, Wuqi handed over the control of the sword formation to Huang Liang. After all, he was cultivating a proper cultivation technique of the human race, and only Panga's sacred energy could control the entire sword formation. Although Huang Liang's control of the sword formation was not as good as Wuqi's, and its lethality against the fiend celestials was reduced by more than 100 times, with Xia and Princess Zhongli replenishing its power, there was no need to worry about any mistakes. Transforming into a breeze, Wuqi fixed his eyes on the 4 Daozu curiously. He followed them from a distance, carefully hiding his aura along the way as they traveled at top speed. A few months later, the group arrived at the empty and barren land at the edge of Pangu World. Because Pangu continent was constantly absorbing the primal aura in the surroundings to turn it into land, the size of Pangu World was constantly expanding, and the rate of expansion was extremely fast. However, the rate of evolution of the star regions in Pangu World was relatively slower, so the barren land in the outskirts of the starry sky was growing larger and larger. There was nothing in this barren land, not even a speck of dust. From a distance, a boundless chaotic aura that looked like a city wall was flashing with a frightening light, and countless huge whirlpools were spinning rapidly in it. These whirlpools were the phenomenon caused by Pangu continent's absorption of the primal aura to strengthen itself. Each of them could easily devour hundreds of stars in the starry sky outside Pengu world. At every moment, a vast amount of natural energy was sucked into Pengu continent from those whirlpools, causing a tidal reaction that could easily tear the body of a primordial immortal to pieces. Pengu world was vast, and the vast divine sense of a Tao-fusing expert could cover the entire world. But now that the heavenly secrets were in chaos, although the magic power and divine abilities of Yuan Ling, who had merged with the heavenly Tao, were not affected, the range of their divine sense was greatly interfered with. Now that the few Daozu had come to this barren land, no one could find them unless someone had been following them. Hiding in the void, Wuxia quietly looked at the 4 Buddhist patriarchs and their 36 disciples thousands of miles away. Sitting on the lotus thrones, the 4 Buddhist patriarchs spread their divine sense into a large net and carefully scanned the surroundings for a while. Then, with a wave of their hands, they cast an invisible restrictive barrier around them. Just at the moment when they laid down the restrictive spell, Wuxia had carefully slipped next to them and sneaked into the barrier. As the 4 Buddhist patriarchs sat in midair, one of them sighed in a low voice and said, "I never thought the Wahuang clan would be so cruel. They are pushing us so hard." They sighed in unison, then another one snorted and said, "Ao Buzan, that bastard, we should have released him from purgatory back then. Our Buddhist celestial 8 divisions, the dragon division of many, has spent so much blood and energy on it. It is not easy for us to be of great use, but he has pulled us all over." Chi snorted coldly. One of the Buddhist patriarchs said indifferently, "Let's see if we can win over the East Sea this time. If we succeed, we can even promise the king of East Sea a great benefit, not to mention those worldly possessions. At worst, we can let him join the Buddhist sect and become a Buddhist patriarch. In the future, he will be on equal footing with us. What else can he say?" The last Buddhist patriarch nodded and said with a smile, "That's right. As long as we win this battle, the Buddhist sect will certainly prosper, and the 7 of us will really have the opportunity to transcend the mortal world and become saints." I don't think those 9 old ox-noses can imagine why there are so many loopholes in the list of deification they made. The 4 Buddhist patriarchs laughed in unison, their laughter filled with boundless complacency. Wuxia was stunned. Since the 4 Buddhist patriarchs said that, did it mean that the list of deification made by the 9 Daozu had anything to do with them? Could it be that there were spies planted by the Buddhist patriarchs in the Tao League? To be able to tamper with the list of deification, the spies they planted must at least have the status of the first disciples of the 9 Buddhist patriarchs, right? Poor 9 Daozu. How many spies were planted around them? After laughing for a while, the 4 Buddhist patriarchs' faces changed, and Chi shouted at the same time, "Set up the formation." The 36 eminent virtues of the Buddhist League, who accompanied them, revealed their avatars at the same time. Their bodies were bronze in color, mottled with spots, and emanated an ancient aura. When the aura rushed at Wuxia, he felt his body tighten and his heart beat violently. The cultivation base of these ancient Buddhas was at least at the 2nd tier of Tao-breaking realm. They should be the true core disciples of the Buddhist League. But looking at them, Wuxia could not help but wonder if there were spies planted by the Wahuang clan, or the Daozu among them. Who could be sure? Perhaps some of them were loyal to outsiders? As soon as the 36 ancient Buddhas appeared, green lotuses began to fall silently from the void. The strange light illuminated the void, and wherever it passed, even a few specks of dust were turned into nothingness. The place had become a pure vacuum. Apart from Wuxia, who had used the aura-concealing mystic art in the scroll of stealing to hide his body, perhaps even the 9 Daozu would be forced to reveal their true forms. The 4 Daozu stood in the 4 cardinal directions, stretched out their hands at the void in front of them at the same time, and cried out in a low voice, "Appear!" A deep chanting could be vaguely heard. Auspicious clouds spread in all directions, and 3 golden pagodas, each 10,000 miles tall, slowly emerged from the void. In the middle of the 3 pagodas was a small piece of land, less than 1,000 miles in circumference. A dark cloud held up this piece of land, and some temples and Zen forests could be vaguely seen in it. Indistinctly, one could hear the faint chanting of scriptures. "My disciples, your opportunity to serve the Buddhist League has come. cried one of the Buddhist patriarchs in a low voice. The strange, hoarse-chanting soared into the sky, accompanied by thousands of powerful auras. Black light flickered as thousands of strange Buddhas appeared around Chi-Chi. They circled the 4 Buddhist patriarchs 3 times respectfully, then dropped to their knees and cried out in a deep voice, "Your disciples offer greetings, Buddhas. May you live a long life." Wuxia was shocked to see these strange-looking Buddhas. They were not natives of Pangu continent at all, but fiend gods from outer heavenly realms. Judging by their words and actions, they were all practicing the cultivation techniques of the Buddhist League, and their cultivation bases had at least reached the peak of the primordial realm. Some of them even had the cultivation base of Tao-breaking realm. Looking at these Buddhas, Wuxia could not help but smile. It seemed that things were getting more and more interesting. Chapter 10:14. No old demon in the realm of Tao fusing could be underestimated. Wuxia followed closely behind a fiend god, who had the lower body of a goat and the upper body of a human, but had the head of a goat. Transforming into a breeze, he flew across the void. Just now, the 4 Buddhist patriarchs had opened the small Taoist Rite temple they had set up in the void many years ago, and released hundreds of thousands of fiend gods from outer realms. The one Wuxia was following now was the one with the highest cultivation base. Although the fiend god had a strange appearance, he was extremely fluent in the common language of Pangu continent. Along the way, he kept reciting the indestructible Vajra fiend subduing scripture, and the way he shook his head did not look like a fiend god from outer realms, but more like a pedantic teacher. He was shrouded in black smoke, which was extremely corrosive, but under the observation of Wuqi's primal Dharma eyes, he could see that the core of the smoke was a ball of intense golden light. Amidst the pure and blazing golden light were 3 natal relics the size of a fist, each of which contained a shadow that looked exactly like the fiend god. The shadow was surrounded by lotus flowers. Although he still looked like a fiend god from outer realms, he had transformed into a Buddha of the Buddhist League on the inside, and his cultivation base was much higher than the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha. He was almost at the peak of the Tao-breaking realm. Wuxia followed him because he was curious about what the 4 Buddhist patriarchs wanted them to do. When the 4 Buddhist patriarchs delivered their orders to these fiend gods just now, they had directly instilled the orders into their spiritual oceans with the mystic arts of the Buddhist League. Even Wuxia could not, or dared not, eavesdrop on their orders. After all, although Wuqi's cultivation base was extremely strong now, it was still not strong enough in front of the 4 Buddhist patriarchs. If he accidentally exposed himself, he would either be killed on the spot or forcibly converted into a monk. Wuxia did not like either of the 2 outcomes. Therefore, he could only follow the demon god to his destination to see the specific situation. The demon god kept chanting scriptures along the way. Occasionally, groups of demon gods from other domains would meet him in the void. Those demon gods were clearly not from the same world as him. Whenever they met the goat-headed demon god, they would happily come to hunt him down. However, this fiend celestial never made a move. He only shouted a few Buddhist mantras to shatter his opponent's soul. The power of those mantras left Wuxia speechless. Even a true Buddhist monk would find it difficult to cultivate such a powerful mantra. How did this goat-head learn it? Also, when did the Buddhist ancestors take in so many fiend celestials from other realms as disciples? Hundreds of thousands of foreign fiend celestials came from at least 1,000 different foreign races. The Buddhas of the Buddhist monasteries had spent a lot of effort to train these ferocious and tyrannical fiend celestials into qualified disciples of the Buddhist monasteries. As he flew at high speed, it was as if the goat-headed demon god could sense some unique aura in the void. He flew past countless star regions and finally, a large number of fiend celestials that looked exactly like him appeared in the void ahead. The lower body was that of a goat, the upper body was that of a human, and the head was that of a goat. These fiend celestials all held huge bone hammers made of white bones. They roared and fought with a group of immortals in Taoist robes in the void. There were about 1,000 of these immortals. They formed the 8 trigrams demon subduing sword array, and released thousands of sword beams that swept across the sky. There were at least 20,000 goat-headed fiend celestials facing them. However, the cultivation bases of these fiend celestials varied. The strongest among them was weaker than the leader of the immortals. On top of that, these fiend celestials did not cooperate well with each other. They were divided into hundreds of small groups of different sizes by the sword beams, and there was no tacit understanding between them at all. Just as the fiend celestial that Wuxia was tracking arrived, 2,000 feet long sword beams twisted and minced the bodies of dozens of fiend celestials into pieces. Blood and flesh splattered all over the sky. Chi-Chi roared furiously. The bone hammers in their hands shook, and with a series of loud crackling noises, countless black lightning serpents enveloped the 8 trigrams demon-subduing sword array. These lightning serpents were different from the thunder magic commonly used by Pangu world immortals. The explosive power of the lightning was not great, but it was highly corrosive and carried a bone-piercing coldness. If touched by the lightning serpents, a large part of one's body would be instantly corroded. The defensive immortal treasures of a few immortals were corroded by the lightning, and the black lightning serpents and black mist seeped into their bodies. These immortals let out shrill howls, but before they could take life-saving spirit pills, their bodies had been corroded into puddles of blood. Their immortal souls flew up into the sky while screaming shrilly. Hurriedly, Wuxia took out the Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking brush. With a gentle stroke, a few immortal souls suddenly dispersed, and their true spirits were sucked into the transmigration power. The goat-headed fiend celestial swaggered to the middle of the battle formation. He threw his head back and let out a long roar, and an enormous wave of divine sense swept across the entire battlefield. Both the fiend celestial and the immortals heard the thunderous roar in his divine sense. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. For the sake of this old monk, please call a truce. My fellow Taoists, you are fated to join the Buddhist League. If you are willing to be my disciple, your future achievements will be limitless. When Wuxia sensed the voice of the fiend celestial, he almost laughed out loud, and even his invisibility magic nearly failed him. For a fiend celestial, who looked no different from a goat, to be so familiar with the catchphrases of the Buddhist League, the Buddhas of the Buddhist League must have spent a lot of effort on them. The fiend celestials were stunned, and so were the thousands of immortals. Both sides stared at the goat-headed fiend celestial, as if he was a monster. For a full quarter of an hour, the battlefield fell into an eerie silence. After a long time, the leader of the immortals forced himself to calm down and asked, "May I ask which eminent monk of the Buddhist League is here?" Just as the goat-headed fiend celestial was about to speak, a few fiend celestials behind him threw their heads back and roared, then swung their bone hammers at his back. A few dark, hammer-shaped balls of light shot across the sky and hit him hard on the back. The balls of light exploded, shrouding the fiend celestial in black smoke and electric snakes. Then, a golden light suddenly shot out from the black smoke. A bright and clear golden flame surrounded the fiend celestial, while the light of Buddha burned away the black smoke and electric snakes. The goat-headed fiend celestial slowly turned to his stunned brethren and cried out in a low voice, "Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. If you can't, then die." With a wave of his hand, a golden thunderbolt whistled out. Amidst the deafening sound of thunder, the few fiend celestials were blown into specks of golden light. A ferocious and brutal aura spread out of the goat-headed fiend celestial, and wherever it went, over 20,000 goat-headed fiend celestials dropped to their knees and bowed respectfully to him. The fiend celestial nodded in satisfaction, then turned to the thousands of immortals and said, "Never mind, you don't have a great fate with the Buddhist League. Entering my belly and becoming my food is also your fate with the Buddhist League. Not everyone is qualified to enter my belly. Merciful Buddha, be a good man in your next lives, and be reincarnated as monks." Before those immortals could come back to their senses, the fiend celestial opened his mouth and inhaled. The bodies of over 1,000 immortals froze, and their spirit blood and souls turned into blood-red torrents, rushing out of their bodies and quickly flowing into the fiend celestial's mouth. A full 10 minutes later, the bodies of over 1,000 immortals were turned into dried corpses and shattered in the air. All the energies contained in their flying swords and magical treasures were devoured by the fiend celestial. turning them into scrap metal and scattering all over the sky. Laughing, the fiend celestial nodded proudly and said, "How many years has it been since the last time I ate meat? Merciful Buddha, I, your disciple, am leading them into the Buddhist League. Hee hee, you bunch of evil creatures, who led you to invade Pangu world this time? Who is it?" A violent wave of divine sense swept across the void, and the trembling fiend celestials hurriedly roared towards the sky in response to his roar. The god fiend smiled in satisfaction and said, "So it's my nephew. After I disappeared back then, he actually inherited the throne? In that case, tell my nephew that I have returned, that I am stronger than him, and that I want to become the king of my tribe. If he does not agree, then let us duel according to the rules of our ancestors." The fiend gods threw their heads back and roared as they quickly transformed into black bolts of lightning and rushed toward a few nearby star regions. Before long, countless goat-headed fiend gods rushed out from tens of thousands of nearby heavenly realms. The demon god at the very front was about 10,000 feet tall. His fur was crimson in color. It was a thick layer of sticky blood that covered his body, causing him to have this color. The god fiend that Wuxia had followed all the way here laughed strangely. Without even greeting his nephew, he rushed up and punched him into pieces. He took out the brains of the leading demon god and drew a strange rune on his chest. Behind him, countless goat-headed demon gods fell silent for a moment. Then a tremendous wave of divine sense exploded out of them at the same time, and they all knelt down in midair to pledge their allegiance to the fiend god. The world of fiend gods in outer heavenly realms was just like that, where the strongest was king. A powerful wave of divine sense swept across the void. The fiend god, who had just snatched the throne from his nephew, waved his hands and roared, "You bunch of useless fools! Instead of fighting for delicious food, you come here to plunder these barren planets. As your new king, I feel ashamed for you. Send my nephew's wife and daughter to me. According to the rules of our ancestors, I am their new husband. Well, follow me, and I will take you to a place with endless delicious food." Leaving behind the ruined outer heavenly realms, the goat-headed fiend gods turned into a mighty army and headed straight for Pangu continent like a torrent of destruction. Wuxia followed closely behind them. Along the way, he saw armies of fiend gods leaving behind the planets in outer heavenly realms and heading straight for Pangu continent. Nothing could hide from Wuxia's primordial magical eyes. The leaders of these fiend gods were all shrouded in a massive Buddhist light. Nearly 10 years after Prince Chongqing opened the spatial portal and let the fiend gods into Pangu world, the army of fiend gods gathered in the sky above Pangu continent. When the number of fiend gods had reached a certain level, they broke through the void and descended straight on Pangu continent. The place where they descended was just outside the city of Wanling. Countless demon gods surrounded the myriad spirit city and immediately launched an attack on the city. Chapter 10:15. The city of Wanling was surrounded by an army of fiend gods. Outside the 4 city gates, countless fiend celestials formed a black carpet that covered every inch of land. Even the high-ranking immortals who guarded the city gates couldn't see the limit of these fiend celestial carpets, even when they used all kinds of divine abilities and magic to look out for hundreds of thousands of miles. High up in the sky, dark clouds formed by dozens of fiend gods blanketed the entire city. Because there were too many of them, the sun was blocked by their thick clouds, and only the bright immortal light emitted by the city itself illuminated the surroundings. When the immortal light, as clear as water, shone on everyone, the people of the Ling dynasty in the city felt a chill in their hearts, as if they were soaked in ice water. As for the underground of the city, countless fiend gods who were good at burrowing underground were doing their best to attack the city's underground defenses. Like raindrops, countless fiend gods bombarded the underground foundation of Wanling City, which was covered with tens of thousands of layers of defensive mechanisms. The entire city was trembling, and the immortal light emitted from all defensive mechanisms in the city was dimming. Clearly, the attacks from the earth veins were also disturbed by these fiend gods. The army of fiend gods had come so quickly and fiercely, and there was even a powerful force that interfered with the senses of the almighty experts of the 33 heavens. No one had warned the emperor and ministers of the Ling dynasty of the arrival of these fiend gods. By the time the almighty experts of the Dao League realized that something was wrong and wanted to send experts to reinforce the Ling dynasty, the armies of fiend gods from dozens of clans had formed a huge formation outside the 33 heavens, completely cutting off the connection between the 33 heavens and the outside world. The fiend gods in the formation did not care about their own sacrifices and losses. They sacrificed countless living beings in exchange for great power at every moment. None of the almighty experts of the Dao League could break the formation in a short period of time. It seemed to be faintly restraining all the cultivation techniques of the Dao League. Unless the Nine Daozu personally intervened, the formation would certainly cut off all connections between the 33 heavens and the outside world. However, according to the agreement between the Wahuang clan and the other Dao integration stage mighty figures, the Nine Daozu were not allowed to attack unless they wanted to be attacked by the other mighty figures. That would undoubtedly be a disaster for the Dao sect, and the Nine Daozu might be sealed forever. Having lost the reinforcements of the celestial court, the city of Wanling was besieged. The Great Ling dynasty could only rely on their own strength to survive this disaster. Either they annihilated all the fiend celestials outside the city, or they held out until the Dao sect's reinforcements arrived. With the methods of the 33 heavens supreme elders, reinforcements would definitely arrive. It was only a matter of time. Wuxia had transformed into a hideous, ugly three-headed and six-armed fiend celestial with 3 heads and 6 arms, sitting lazily on a strange mount that looked like a bull with a single horn and 6 legs. The mount was the one Wuxia had just snatched after killing a fiend celestial, who looked exactly like him. It looked inconspicuous, but its cultivation base was close to that of a gold immortal. However, the laws of the world it lived in were different from those of Pangu world. Despite its strong cultivation base, the Black Bull's intelligence was still not developed, and it was still a beast through and through. Looking down at the splendid and magnificent city of Wanling, Wuxia looked up into the sky and carefully sensed the powerful restrictive spell that completely cut off Pangu continent's connection with the outside world. He raised his 6 arms with a smile, and 6 dazzling bolts of black lightning gradually condensed in his palms. The brethren around him, who also had 3 heads and 6 arms, stared at him in surprise. The only innate divine ability of this race was the ability to manipulate lava, and they had never seen any of them who was good at using lightning. The endless aura of thunder from hundreds of millions of miles in all directions quickly gathered toward the bolts of lightning in Wuqi's palms. A quarter of an hour later, Wuxia had used all his strength to condense 6 black thunder balls, each the size of a human head. Then he calmly threw them down toward the city of Wanling. 6 beams of black light tore through the void and killed tens of thousands of unlucky fiend celestials from outer domains below Wuxia along the way. These fiend celestials happened to be on the trajectory of the falling thunder balls. The terrible power of thunder was contained in the thunder balls, and just the aura that leaked out of them was enough to turn tens of thousands of fiend celestials into ashes. In the sky above Myriad Spirit City, a dense cluster of green lotuses rose up into the sky. Each lotus released a beam of immortal light that shot into the sky, converging into a dense cloud that shielded the 6 thunderballs. Through the cloud that was 100 miles thick, it could be seen that 360 immortals in purple robes were standing in the sky above Thousand Spirit City, holding banners in their hands. They were dancing in a formation in a mysterious pattern in the sky. Thousands of powerful formation banners and gates were floating around them, spurting out green clouds that looked as vigorous and agile as dragons. 6 restrictive spells destroy. Wuxia casually pointed his finger out. Just as the 6 thunder balls were about to touch the cloud, they suddenly converged inwardly. Very strangely, the black thunderballs turned into a sheet of pale white. Amidst the deathly pale thunderbolt, an extremely dazzling black ancient rune, which seemed to have been branded directly on the soul of the witness, flashed and disappeared. The twisted rune represented the power of destruction in the heavenly Tao, and was the source of all the power of destruction. A crisp noise rang out as the cloud that was hundreds of miles thick was easily shattered by the white thunder ball. The thunderball plunged for hundreds of miles and exploded right at the heart of the formation formed by the 360 peak-level immortals. 3 loud buzzing noises rang out as 3 10-miles-long purple talismans emerged out of thin air. They were crafted with purple immortal jade and shone with a dazzling light that illuminated the entire sky. The white thunderballs were tightly bound by the immortal light emanated from the talismans, and a cloud vortex in the shape of a taiji symbol slowly emerged between the talismans, as if it were about to devour the thunderballs. Explode! Wuxia waved his hand coolly and cried out softly. The first thread of innate thievery energy invisibly penetrated the 3 talismans and stole all the immortal energy contained in them. The dazzling talismans dimmed abruptly, while the thunderballs exploded soundlessly. A white light that symbolized death blanketed the entire myriad spirit city. A terrifyingly high temperature swept out, and the trillions of celestial fiends outside the city wall vanished without a trace amidst the white light. An enormous amount of virtues fell from the sky, but before they could touch the ground, Wuxia had already cast a mighty divine ability and stored all the virtues into his sleeve. The 3 defensive talismans crafted by Daozu were shattered, and the first defensive mechanism of the myriad spirit city was gone. The thunderballs unleashed by Wuxia with all his strength swept across the entire myriad spirit city, with an unstoppable aura of destruction. A series of terrible explosions rang out from the white light, and 99% of the defensive mechanisms in the city were shattered by Wuxia with just one strike. The white light faded away, and the myriad spirit city appeared in front of everyone with black smoke billowing out of it. Myriad Spirit City used to be as magnificent as an immortal realm, but after Wuxia's strike, more than 90% of the buildings in the city had collapsed. Crumbled palaces, pavilions, and cracked tiles could be seen everywhere. Some of the defensive mechanisms were destroyed by the tremendous force, but the core of the formation that powered them was still running. Violent energies rushed out of the underground energy veins, ripping open tens of thousands of holes of various sizes on the surface of the massive Myriad Spirit City. Except for the Myriad Spirit's Palace, which was still protected by 3 layers of soft immortal light, the entire Myriad Spirit City was completely exposed to all the celestial fiends. After a brief moment of silence, a deep and frenzied howl rang out as countless celestial fiends threw themselves at the city. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty in the city struggled to their feet and quickly formed into battle formations of various sizes, shouting the slogan of "Fight to the death." As they blocked all the major roads in the city, 9 blue talismans flew out of the Myriad Spirit's Palace in a row. An immense pressure swept out in all directions, turning the area tens of thousands of miles around the city into a no-fly zone. No one below the realm of Dao breaking could fly, unless their strength had reached the Dao breaking realm. The 9 blue talismans were made by Liu Bang, whose face was pale. They were the trump cards given to him by his father, the Big Dipper Emperor. Not only were they extremely powerful space-restricting talismans, but they also had all kinds of unimaginable defensive powers. The Big Dipper Emperor had personally gone to the Dao Yuan Palace and asked the 9 Daozu for them. Later, when Liu Bang stood out among the many sons of the Big Dipper Emperor, he was rewarded with these talismans. Hundreds of Dao-breaking fiend gods, who had nothing to do with the Buddhist League, swooped down. They did not use any divine abilities or mystic arts, but kept their huge bodies tens of thousands of feet tall. They waved their fists and punched the immortal light unleashed by the talismans with all their might. The immortal light rippled, but it remained unbreakable. These fiend celestials were not discouraged. They kept shouting orders to their clansmen to attack Myriad Spirit City, while they persevered and attacked the various restrictions outside Myriad Spirit's Palace. Countless fiend gods rushed toward the city excitedly. Their eyes were fixed on the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, who had lined up in battle formations, drooling. Delicious meat, delicious blood. They could already smell the intoxicating aroma. In addition to the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, there were also countless Dao League immortals in the city, and even thousands of celestial lords from the celestial court. They were all delicious food. As the fiend gods were about to rush into the city, the ground in the streets and alleys of the city opened up, and countless huge statues of divine beasts made of rare alloys slowly rose from the ground. Some of the statues were stuck halfway up. It was obvious that the lightning bolt unleashed by Wuxia had destroyed their mechanisms. In addition, the ground in some places had opened up, but there was no movement. It was obvious that the mechanisms in these places had long been damaged. More than 10,000 statues emerged from the ground, scattered in all directions around the city. As the crisp sound of a golden bell rang out, flames sprayed from the mouths of the statues at the same time. Shrill howls rang out as countless fiend gods near the city suffered heavy losses. The area around the city had turned into a vast expanse of white land. Joyful laughter rang out from all over the city. Wuxia chuckled, then transformed into a breeze and flew out of the palace. After carefully studying the immortal light emanating from the 9 talismans in front of him, Wuxia pondered for a moment, then carefully passed through them. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.